Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 476, Mind Control. On the Dawn border, it seems that, because the princess's engagement is approaching, after Viserys' coronation ceremony, the next thing will be his wedding with the Dawn princess. The fierce melee on the border turned into scattered conflicts. Dawn temporarily suspended its attack on the north for Orion's wedding and retreated again, and the Reach and Stormlands also breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Facing this barbaric and tenacious enemy in the south, although Dawn is not rich, it has often been necessary for the Stormlands and the Reach to join hands in history to stop this mad dog from biting people everywhere. Westeros, which has been in a long chaos, has finally entered a brief peace, and now the whole world is holding its breath, waiting for the next move of this newly crowned Viserys. I don't know where the troubled Westeros will go. In King's Landing, as the protagonist of the era that countless people are paying attention to, Viserys had a strange dream that night, since Benjen placed the branch sent by the three-eyed raven in the Red Castle. He dreamed of the past world and saw his familiar relatives, but strangely, he remained awake in the dream world. Then, when he looked at the mirror out of curiosity, he saw a very familiar face. Viserys woke up from his dream, but when he opened his eyes, he was still familiar with the room, the high ceiling, the soft feather bed, and a beautiful woman with a bulging belly and pregnant with his flesh and blood lying quietly beside his bed. Viserys' emotions were complicated. He sighed for a long time, then kissed Orion gently, and then left the bed. The time had come. When his eyes looked at the silver-plated bronze mirror in the king's bedroom, the black mist began to roll. Viserys raised his mental power to 30. According to his previous experience, when the attribute reaches a new stage, a new ability will be awakened. Therefore, Viserys gave priority to improving his mental power, which he was best at. When the black fog gathered into a river and rushed endlessly, the silver-haired young man only felt that his head was pierced by countless needles. Then, he felt cold all over, as if he was in a world of ice and snow. The world in front of him suddenly became much clearer, and a transparent purple flame burned in his lavender eyes. This ability is. Feeling the power contained in his eyes, Viserys' expression was slightly startled. Viserys. At this moment, a woman's exclamation came from behind him. Viserys turned his head slightly, and the expression on the face of the Dawn Princess suddenly solidified. A little purple light appeared in the depths of her beautiful eyes, but it was not very eye-catching. Mind control? Viserys' eyes showed a little incredible. His mental power easily controlled Orion's mind through his eyes. The effect of this ability is simply too extraordinary, and you can understand its terrible effect with your toes. In this game of power, what ability would be simpler and cruder than directly controlling the opponent's brain? When Tywin, Highgarden Rose, the Order Alliance, the Baratheon brothers, etc., were still playing tricks and playing a power game, Viserys had already started playing the magic world. What is the end of science? The two sides are not opponents of the same level at all. This is really. Then the purple flames burning in Viserys' eyes went out, and he returned to the pair of gorgeous deep eyes like purple gems. And Orion, who was half sitting naked on the feather bed, also showed a puzzled expression on her face. She seemed to have just woken up and saw something, but just as she opened her mouth to call her fiancé, she forgot what she should say when the word came to her lips. What did I want to say? The Dawn Princess rubbed her black and shiny hair in confusion. This had never happened to her before. Why did she forget the words when she came to her lips? Could it be that pregnancy makes people stupid for 3 years, and she had become stupid in advance? Orion opened her mouth, but couldn't remember anything. She looked at Viserys standing in front of the mirror, and turned to look at her. It seemed that she had just called his name. Finally, she could only speak in a frustrated tone. It's okay, my love. I forgot what I wanted to say. Viserys had just controlled the mental power in his eyes to delete the scene where Orion saw the flames burning in his eyes. Therefore, a part of her memory was missing, and the connection between the previous and the next became that the words came to her lips, but she forgot how to say them. People forget a lot of things every day. Viserys looked at his fiancée and saw that she really couldn't remember anything, so he shook his head slightly. Erasing such a small piece of memory will not have any impact on Irion's normal life. If Viserys wants to modify a person's memory on a large scale, it will produce a strong sense of separation. As a caster, he may have to rest for a while. Our wedding is about to begin. Then Viserys sat down by the bed and held his fiancée's hand. Yeah. And Orion's cheeks were also clearly blushed. This time it was sincere. After all, marriage is the most important thing for every girl. After dealing with family affairs, the next thing is official affairs. Tyrion was recommended by Rhaenys and approved by Viserys, and finally became the king's personal advisor, a kind of think tank. Although he himself has no real power, he is also the object of countless people's flattery because of his closeness to the king. Tyrion conveyed his sister Cersei's request for an audience to Viserys. "Your Majesty, my sister." Tyrion, who was buried in the sea of documents, raised his head and spoke. This is the third time Cersei has requested to see Viserys during this period. The first 2 times she asked the guards to apply, but they were rejected by Viserys. He wanted to arrange for Cersei, Joffrey and Myrcella after the public trial. Therefore, this time Cersei had no choice but to ask her brother Tyrion to convey it. Fortunately, Cersei has not yet formed an irreconcilable hatred with Tyrion, and she even shed a few tears for Tyrion's death. Cersei? Viserys thought for a moment and shook his head. Let her live in the Red Keep first. Let her rest assured that the trial of the Lannister family has nothing to do with her and her son and daughter. If she has nothing to do in the Red Keep now, she can do the work of a servant and help out, but it is impossible for her to leave. Cersei and her 2 children are still very special. Viserys can forgive the lives of the 3 of them and not kill them, but as the queen of the former dynasty and the prince and princess, they are destined to not leave Viserys' sight. Otherwise, it is very easy to fall into the hands of someone with ulterior motives, and their fate will be even more tragic, and it will also cause trouble for Viserys. "Yes, Your Majesty." Tyrion could only nod helplessly after hearing Viserys' words, shrugged his shoulders, and said that he could do nothing to help his sister. Chapter 477 Jaime Lannister. Since the fall of King's Landing without a fight, Jaime Lannister has found an opportunity to leave the city. However, he did not return to Casterly Rock as others expected, but prepared to go to the East Continent. Jaime was disheartened after being betrayed by his sister and brother. At the same time, as a general, he also knew that the war against dragons would be quite difficult. He did not think that his father could defend Casterly Rock, so he was ready to leave Westeros completely and go to the vast world to relax. However, Blackwater Bay was blocked by the Targaryen fleet, and the Gold Cloaks were also searching for his traces everywhere. Jaime was offered a very high reward, so after leaving King's Landing, he went all the way south to find another port to go to the sea. Then he covered his face and hid his name and got on a merchant ship bound for Essos as he wished, heading to the unknown world he had never set foot in. Tyrion wanted to capture his brother and send him to the East Continent, but he never expected that the misunderstanding between the 2 brothers would lead to all this, and Jaime finally set off for the East. The fleet floated on the sea for a long time. At first, Jaime still remembered every day carefully and had a beautiful vision for the future. But with the long years on the sea and the occasional bad weather, the once handsome blonde knight became completely unkempt. No one could recognize that this was the famous kingkiller Sir Jaime Lannister without disguise. There was even a time when the fleet encountered a storm, and the surging waves kept hitting the fleet. All the people on their ship were forced to go on deck to save themselves under the command of the captain from Bravos. At that time, Jaime braved the wind and rain and pulled the rope hard, but was hit by a huge wave in front of him. He hit his head directly on the wooden barrel full of water and fainted. Fortunately, the black-skinned captain from Bravos rescued him in time. Otherwise, perhaps no one would believe that the Kingslayer died silently in the sea. The fleet drifted on the sea for a long time, and finally arrived at its destination one day. Woo! The majestic Titan not far away let out a melodious roar. Every time a ship passed by, the Titan would make such a sound above it to warn the secret city hiding behind the giant. This is the Titan of Bravos. The captain from Bravos, wearing a grey-brown robe and dark skin, turned his back to the Titan, facing the sunset and the foreigners in front of him with wide eyes, and spoke proudly. One of the 9 man-made wonders in the book of long-legged llamas. The gods created 7 wonders, but humans created 9. But for me, the Titans are definitely the top of the 9 man-made wonders. I haven't seen much of the other rotten fish and shrimp, but the dark-skinned Bravos captain spoke proudly. His ancestors came from the Summer Islands, where people have dark skin, their own language, and often wear bright feather cloaks. But his family came to Bravos by merchant ship during his grandfather's time, and settled down here. After several generations of hard work, they finally had such a small boat, and followed the merchant caravan, to make a living by sailing all day. However, the captain of Bravos was proudly talking, but he found that in addition to those stunned foreigners, several crew members who also came from Bravos with him also widened their eyes, and put on an incredible look. Logically speaking, they have been following the fleet for so many years, and they have seen the Titans countless times. Hey, what's wrong with you guys? Why do you have such expressions? Did I say something wrong? The dark-skinned captain scratched his head, and then saw one of the crew members widened his eyes, but raised his hand, and pointed behind him. What? Then the captain turned his head, and the ship quietly drifted with the water to the feet of the Titans. The merchant ships in the fleet lined up to pass through the narrow river. Facing the light of the setting sun, he saw the magnificent Titan still standing on the earth, holding up the broken sword. But it seemed to have lost its head. Where's the head? Gods, where's the Titan's head? The dark-skinned captain held his head with both hands, and could hardly believe his eyes. It was obvious that they had not received any news from the ship outside, and didn't know what happened in Bravos. In the crowd, James heard the conversation between the captain and the crew, and he breathed a sigh of relief. He just looked at the headless giant and thought that the legendary Titans were headless. It looked a bit scary. Then he turned his head and looked behind him. There was an endless sea. He came from the other side of the sea. He would never forget what happened there. Cersei, Tyrion, father, Casterly Rock, now tall and handsome with blonde hair, Sir Jaime Lannister, the famous Kingslayer in the Seven Kingdoms, has long had greasy and grey hair, and his handsome face is full of stubble. Only his eyes are still bright and his smile is as sharp as a knife. The fleet passed the Titans in an orderly manner, then bypassed the ruins of the arsenal, and came to the checker dock, to be inspected by the customs officials of Bravos. Because of the huge volume of logistics, this process often lasts for half a day. Foreigners who paid the ship's fare, such as Jaime Lannister, who were not crew members of the fleet, naturally had no need to wait on the ship. They were inspected by the soldiers, and then could get off the ship. I owe you a life. I will pay it back in the future. Wearing a linen shirt, a tattered cloak and a hood, Jaime came to the black captain and spoke seriously. The dark-skinned captain was still immersed in the sadness of the Titan's head falling off, and did not react. The foreigner in front of him walked past him without looking back, and walked down from the boat. However, Jaime thought that he could escape successfully in the dangerous King's Landing, and now no one would recognize him, even if he returned to King's Landing, and there would be no danger in Bravos. But he didn't expect that he was stopped by someone just after he got off the boat and took 2 steps. The man's name is Kingslayer Jaime Lannister. The ragged and disheveled blonde knight stopped suddenly. Chapter 478, Joining the Faceless. In front of him was a handsome man with red and white hair. He looked at James with his eyes. James saw the other person's instinct as a warrior, and suddenly a warning rose in his heart. The man in front of him was just standing there, but he had a sense of unity, like an invulnerable hedgehog. This person is very powerful. James' heart instantly became more alert, and even one hand had touched the dagger hidden under the coarse cloth at his waist. But on the surface, he seemed very calm. After more than a month of drifting on the sea, James had made a perfect farewell to the proud boy in the past, recognized his true self, and became more pragmatic and calm. Who are you? The disheveled blonde knight asked calmly, and at the same time shook his head to deny the other party's identification. You've got the wrong person. I'm from Westeros, from Old Town, and I've also heard of the name of the Kingslayer, but I'm not him. The handsome man with red and white hair just shrugged his shoulders slightly, and spoke to comfort James' sudden nervousness. Don't be nervous, man. At the same time, he glanced at James' palm on his waist. He knew there was a dagger there, but his slight fluctuation in his eyes made James even more nervous because the other party noticed his little move. I'm just an unknown person, and I don't have any bad intentions in finding the man, otherwise he would have been lying down long ago. As for whether the man is the Kingslayer Jaime Lannister, the man shrugged his shoulders again and spoke meaningfully. I believe he knows it very well. Jaime took a deep breath after hearing what the other party said. He knew that the other party did know his identity, and there was no need to continue to hide it, which would only cause trouble. It was just that the other party's arrogant but reasonable tone made him quite unhappy. As the youngest member of the legendary Knights of the Seven Kingdoms, his swordsmanship is unrivaled. However, due to some strange coincidence, the boy who wanted to be Arthur Dayne eventually grew up to be the Smiling Knight. Jaime finally stopped hiding it, just looked around and sneered. Nobody? I don't know who you are, but if you come here alone, what can you do to me, even if you have bad intentions? Although Jaime's clothes were ragged and his hair was greasy, his expression was proud, and he actually recovered a bit of his former appearance. Then he spoke openly. Tell me, now that I have fallen into your territory and have been discovered, I can't escape. What do you want? Take me back to King's Landing and sell me to that boy. Only 1,000 gold royals? I think you might as well sell me to my father. He might pay 10 times the price for my life. Jaime no longer concealed his identity because it was useless to hide it. He directly admitted that he was the Kingslayer Jaime Lannister and spoke at the same time. But his seemingly conceited words contained cautious temptations. He was testing how many people the man who called himself Nobody brought with him. Was it just him, or were there other accomplices? What were their positions and purposes? Was Bravos their territory, or were they all foreigners like him, who just happened to meet him at the dock and recognized him? And what did they want to do after recognizing his identity? Kill him? Take revenge? Although Jaime had not deliberately offended anyone over the years, his arrogant attitude would definitely not please most people. Or were they going to kidnap and sell him to the boy as he guessed? Viserys was the boy that Jaime mentioned, because he had once sent the young Viserys away from the Red Keep as a member of the King's Guard. And if this group of people really just wanted money, then Jaime would recommend them to sell him to his father. Jaime certainly didn't want to die, and his father had nothing else but money, and he believed that his father was willing to pay 10 times the price to buy his life from these bandits. But to Jaime Lannister's disappointment, he guessed in his heart, but the result was that he guessed wrong. He was indeed the only one who came, and he didn't have any so-called accomplices, and his accomplices had all died long ago. He had no grudge against Jaime, and he would not kidnap and sell him to Viserys or the Duke of Casterly Rock, and he didn't come for money. Someone's name is now Jaqen H'ghar, and men can call someone Jaqen. Jaqen H'ghar looked at Jaime speechlessly, who was guessing and testing, and finally spoke out when he couldn't bear it anymore. I have a talent for observing men. I have only one question for you, Kingslayer. Jaqen did not bother to continue to speak in the Larathian way, calling himself someone, and avoiding the use of first and second person pronouns such as I and you, but asked directly. Jaime was slightly stunned. He did not expect that his guess about the other party was all wrong, but he nodded immediately. Ask. Do you still want to go back? Then Jaqen asked directly without hesitation, and Jaime fell into silence in an instant. He stared at the other party with his shining green eyes, slightly grasped the dagger at his waist, but finally let go. What do you mean? I don't mean anything special. But Jaqen seemed particularly calm, as if he did not see the threat in the eyes of the young knight in front of him, and then continued to speak. It's just that the thousand-faced god is the creditor, and only life can repay death. Someone from an organization you may have heard of may be able to help you. The other party on the dock did not attract much attention. Perhaps the visitor was a person with a very low sense of existence, and he would not attract attention when chatting with a tall beggar. When Jaime learned the true identity of the visitor, his eyes widened slightly. He was convinced. Finally, he thought for a moment and thought that he really had no place to stand in Bravos, and then nodded. Okay, I'm willing to join. Don't worry, whether the Kingslayer can join still needs to be assessed. But Jaqen spoke calmly. Success, become a nameless person. Failure, and also become a nameless person. From now on, there will be no name for you in the world. James clenched his fist slightly after hearing the words of the faceless man. He understood what the other party meant. If he succeeded, he would become a member of the faceless man, and if he failed, he would die. However, the proud knight believed that with his swordsmanship talent, he would be able to pass some bullshit test, successfully return to Cersei in the future, and even kill the boy. Then the two walked out of the port one after the other. At this time, James accidentally saw the face of a wanted criminal posted on the wall outside the port. It was the faceless man who just called himself Jaqen. James was slightly stunned and turned his head suddenly, but found that Jaqen had disappeared. Only a man with a hooked nose and a scar on his face looked at him coldly and then spoke impatiently. "What are you doing? Hurry up. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 479, Bila Cathedral. The wedding will be held in the main hall of the Great Sept of Bila, which can accommodate about 700 distinguished guests. So we must control the number of guests, Your Majesty. But the scale of the wedding is definitely not just 700 people. The rest can only wait outside the main hall. And these people are not without purpose. Their presence means to remind the 700 people with envious eyes how glorious their noble seats are. The court steward, who was wearing an exquisite black leather short robe, was chattering with Viserys. Viserys was wearing a soft casual dress, with a clean face, and long silver gold hair freely scattered. I don't know if he was listening to the court steward's words, but he just perfunctorily agreed a few times and nodded slightly. Yeah. Okay. Alright. You decide. At the same time, he was looking around this magnificent faith center of the 7 kingdoms. This is a magnificent marble dome building with 7 crystal towers. There is a huge bell on each tower, but it will only ring at the same time on major occasions, such as royal weddings and funerals. The Great Sept of Bila can also be called the Sept of Bila or the Cathedral of Saint Bila. It was built by Bila Targaryen I, the 9th king of the Targaryen family, to ascend the Iron Throne. Bila Targaryen I is also known as Saint Bila or Bila blessed by God. The Great Sept is located at the top of the Senai Hill in King's Landing. It replaced the Starry Sept in Old Town and became the center of the 7 gods of Westeros. It laid the foundation for the future king's power to be greater than the power of God and the king to appoint the archbishop. Because of the king's coming, the Great Sept of Bila had been emptied of everyone here one day in advance. Even the monks living here were forbidden to step out of the door, and they were all driven out on the day of the wedding to prevent any possible accidents. Now they could only hide in the room and look out curiously to see what the famous young dragon lord, who had opened up a new kingdom and was crowned as the king, looked like. The whole Great Sept of Bila was silent, with only the sound of 3 people's footsteps echoing clearly. The female knight followed her king with her hand on the hilt of the sword, and also looked at the surrounding environment. She did not believe in the 7 gods. Strictly speaking, she had no faith except Viserys. This was the brightest light in her life that crossed the gloomy sky and completely changed the fate of a Volantis orphan. Maya's eyes fell back on Viserys, hiding a hint of admiration, and then lowered her head. Then they passed through the long hall of lights in the Great September. Many colored lead glass bowls were hung on the ceiling of the corridor. After passing through 2 doors, they finally came to the main hall. Here, the tall altar of the 7 gods was under the dome of glass, gold and crystal, with marble floors and huge window frames on the walls equipped with colored lead glass. Your Majesty will enter through the main gate, hold the Queen's hand, and walk along the red carpet to the gilded statues of the Father and the Virgin Mary to swear an oath. The oath is. The middle-aged palace steward was still chattering with spit flying all over the sky. It's not bad here. Looking at the main hall of the Great Sept of Bila, Viserys finally came to his senses and nodded slightly. The environment here met his expectations for the wedding venue. The palace steward was talking about the wedding process and was suddenly choked by Viserys' words. However, even so, he did not dare to get angry. He could only look at the magnificent environment around him, then took a deep breath, followed Viserys' nonsense and nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. It's really not bad here. This is a place that provides weddings and funerals for the royal family. How could it not be gorgeous? Viserys had just been visiting the Great Sept of Bila with the mentality of a tourist and immersed in it. It was only then that he noticed the subtle change in the palace steward's tone and realized that his attitude just now seemed a bit rude. Sorry, Wes, I was a little distracted just now. But don't worry. Viserys pointed to his head. I have a good memory. I only need to listen to what you just said once, and I can remember everything. Although it is unknown how the outside world describes Viserys, some people claim that the young king is a proud person, born of the most noble blood in the 7 kingdoms, and looks down on the mudlegs in the flea pit. And there are also people who oppose this, saying that Viserys is actually a very humble person. He can treat nobles and civilians equally, and sometimes even treat nobles badly, but he is very humble to civilians. However, Viserys suddenly apologized to himself in a serious manner, which scared the palace steward named Wes. He was young, and had only served one king. The last king he served, Robert Baratheon, and his queen, Cersei, had never been kind to him, let alone apologized for his rude attitude. Your Majesty. The court steward was startled, and was about to explain in fear that he had no complaints just now. Your Majesty. At this time, the fat archbishop came from afar and rescued the frightened court steward. He walked out from the main hall of the Great Sept of Bila, behind the 7-pointed star made of colored lead glass, walked down the steps with difficulty, and came to Viserys with a slight panting breath, and then bowed slightly again. Your Majesty. Then the archbishop nodded to the female knight standing behind Viserys and the court steward, and greeted them respectively. Sir. Steward Weiss. The female king's good and the court steward also nodded. My lord archbishop. I'm only a servant of the gods. I have no fiefdom or title. I cannot be called an lord, sir. The fat on the archbishop's face trembled slightly, and he explained with a polite smile. Sorry. The female knight pressed the hilt of her sword slightly, bowed her head and apologized. She did not know much about the culture of Westeros, and thought that all the great men should be called lords. But the archbishop just smiled, then turned his head, and looked at Viserys, and spoke sincerely. Your Majesty. In the basement of the Great Sept of Bila are the tombs of kings of all generations, including your father. Do you want to pay homage? The silver-haired young man was stunned for a moment. The word father was too far away from him. Ares? In fact, he did not regard the other party as his father in his heart, so that he had not paid homage to him even after so many days since he came to King's Landing. Then Viserys thought for a moment and nodded. Okay. Chapter 480. Begging for alms in the Holy Hall. Next, Viserys visited the king's tomb beneath the Great Sept of Bila, where all Targaryen kings, queens, and princes were buried. Light of the Realm Rhaenyra Targaryen I. Dragonbane Aegon Targaryen III. Bad King Aegon Targaryen IV. Good King Daeron Targaryen II. Finally, Viserys came to the coffin of his father, the last king of the former Targaryen dynasty, Mad King Aerys II Targaryen, who was nominally or only in body. I heard that my father's favorite thing was to watch people being burned. Watch how their skin was burnt and blistered, and melted and fell off their bones. He could burn to death vassals he didn't like, prime ministers who didn't obey him, and anyone who disobeyed him would be burned to death. Viserys' voice rang out in the empty church basement. The female knight felt a little creepy when she heard what Viserys said, and the court steward and the fat archbishop were silent and naturally didn't dare to respond to Viserys' words. Don't worry, right is right, wrong is wrong. My brother often called him the Mad King. Although Viserys came to visit the coffin of Aerys II, he didn't stay in front of his father's apostrophe tomb for too long. Instead, he stayed in front of his brother Aegon's tomb for a long time, and then took away a book that he left behind as a burial companion. Because successive kings were buried here, the underground world of the Great Sept of Bila also stored a large number of expensive vestments, rings, crystal crowns, and other church property. Viserys looked all the way, but he didn't say much. When he got to the ground, he suddenly said casually that the church's assets seemed to be more abundant than the national treasury, which frightened the fat archbishop so much that he broke out in a sweat. You know, although he is very popular among the people, he is a complete killer among the nobles. Just from the fact that countless nobles have been ransacked since the Targaryen army landed in Westeros, it can be seen that he really will use a knife to kill people, and he doesn't care about any bullshit rules and the Church of the Seven Gods. He has dug up the roots of the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms and touched the interests of all the nobles. What else would he not dare to do? Ordinary believers don't know, but his coronation ceremony was changed from the Great Sept of Bela to the throne room of the Red Castle, which is enough to show that Viserys' attitude towards the church is not so tolerant. His Majesty's decision was not opposed by no one, but where did the opposing voices go later? The game in the court was full of swords and shadows. The Archbishop, who had participated in Robert's royal meeting, naturally knew that, if he wanted to land and leave King's Landing safely, he had to walk on thin ice and be careful enough. Because of the invasion of the White Walkers to the south, Archbishop my lord, a large number of refugees from the north have poured into the south of the neck, impacting the lives of the original residents. Kalin Bay is still under repair, and they have no way to go home. Viserys shook his head as he walked and said with a little worry, "There are too many refugees in King's Landing now. The current situation in the Seven Kingdoms is actually more corrupt than imagined. The main reason is that the wildlings blew the horn of winter and collapsed the wall, and then poured into the north and even the southern regions, and even colluded with the mountain clans. The invasion of the White Walkers exacerbated this chaos exponentially. In order not to add troops to the White Walkers, hundreds of thousands, millions, or even more refugees from the north were driven south, passing through the neck and coming to the south. Now the White Walkers have been defeated, but the causeway of the neck has not been repaired yet. The war between the Riverlands and King's Landing has just ended. What can these refugees from the north do? Where can they go? Naturally, they all flock to the big cities, and King's Landing was one of their targets. Those who came to King's Landing and found a job were fine, but those who didn't have a job could only steal and rob. This morning, Blackworm, who is now the commander-in-chief of the capital's guard, reported to Viserys that the crime in King's Landing is becoming more and more obvious, and the means are becoming more and more extreme. Not long ago, Tyrion, who was the king's advisor, also reminded Viserys. He joked that according to the number of people queuing up to the brothel, the population of King's Landing has increased a lot in recent years. Viserys listened to Tyrion's reminder and personally looked through the records of King's Landing in recent years, which showed that the population of King's Landing was estimated to have nearly doubled this year. This is a shocking number, and most of them are homeless and poor people. This is why Viserys suddenly brought the court steward to visit the Great Sept of Bela. Did he really take time out of his busy schedule to come and rehearse the wedding? No, Viserys was actually here to beg for alms. He had heard that the church was very rich. When the fat archbishop heard Viserys' words, he immediately got what he meant and quickly wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and agreed. The church is bathed in the light of the Father and will naturally become the last harbor for the poor. Therefore, the church will provide enough funds to help the capital of the Seven Kingdoms survive this difficult winter and another difficult spring. May the gods bless tomorrow's sunshine to be better. His Majesty went to Bela Cathedral alone, and the church opened the treasury. It was announced that it would purchase 200,000 bushels of wheat, 100,000 bushels of barley, oats and rye, 4,000 cattle, and 10,000 sheep from other places to help the poor people in King's Landing survive this difficult time. This story soon spread in King's Landing. The image of His Majesty the King as a wise and powerful man has been more deeply recognized, while the church, which was beaten and spent money, has become a negative role that everyone wants to beat. Because many poor people who believe in the seven gods thought that the church might be rich, but they didn't expect that the church was so rich. What kind of poor people's rally is this? Why not just call it a rich people's rally? The archbishop is so fat that he can hardly walk. Is this the body shape that can be obtained by sharing the sufferings of believers and eating coarse food all day long? The archbishops and monks of the Seven Gods Church are also rich. The last faith in the hearts of the poor collapsed, so how much love they once had turned into how much hatred they had. In addition, the Red God believers who were at an absolute disadvantage in King's Landing also took the opportunity to jump out and make trouble, and they did make a small-scale demonstration. Fortunately, the church also spent real money this time. These people wanted to make trouble again, but they were short-handed and short-mouthed. In addition, the Unsullied and the Golden Robes maintained order, and finally this storm was successfully calmed down. The church was properly punished, and the urgent problem of the blockade in King's Landing was solved. In King's Landing, the last minor disturbance on the eve of the king's wedding ended, and the wedding officially began the next day. Chapter 481 Sansa. There were many people attending the wedding, even more than the one at Viserys' coronation. Because compared to the Palace of the Seven Kingdoms standing on Aegon's High Hill, the Great Sept of Bela on the top of Visenya Hill was more well known to the common people. Viserys had recently gained a lot of reputation, which pushed this wedding to a climax. Now a large crowd of people gathered on a marble pulpit under the steps outside the Great Sept of Bela, looking forward to the arrival of the newly crowned King of the Seven Kingdoms. The gates of the Red Castle in the distance were wide open, and the guards composed of the Unsullied escorted the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms who participated in the wedding. Viserys still rode his snow-white warhorse, wearing a black and gold brocade robe and cloak with a long sword hanging from his waist, while the beautiful Dawn Princess rode in a special carriage made by the royal family and did not show her face. Back off. Back off, everyone. No attack on the convoys allowed. Under the bright sunshine, the team passed through the road of King's Landing, with golden robes on both sides maintaining order. The Unsullied Legion, wearing black dragon scale armor, held round shields and spears in neat formation, ready for battle. This made many spies hiding in the dark and observing Viserys feel a lot of pressure and a little confused about the future. The Targaryen army is a battle-hardened army. After experiencing the beatings of war, this spirit and the invisible pressure brought by it cannot be concealed. Your Majesty, Your Majesty, look at me. King Viserys. Long live the Targaryen family. The cheers around were also constantly ringing. The prostitute stood on the second floor and deliberately exposed her chest to Viserys. The people raised their hands when they saw the king's eyes. For the people of King's Landing, the Targaryen family is a deep-rooted concept as the royal family of the Seven Kingdoms. The funny thing is that no matter how much the Mad King made trouble and was betrayed by half of the nobles in the Seven Kingdoms, he did not cause a great impact on the people, and in the eyes of the people, he burned many nobles who deserved to die. But after King Robert came to power, who upheld justice and overthrew the Mad King, he easily spent all the remaining silver in the treasury and owed the Lannister family, the Tyrell family, the church, the Iron Bank and the business houses of Tyrosh a total of millions of gold dragons, which led to the country's high debt and riddled with holes, and the livelihood of the people was also greatly affected. The subsequent war between the Wildlings and the White Walkers in the south detonated all these contradictions, so Viserys was so easily supported after he came to King's Landing. Accompanied by cheers and shouts on both sides of the road and falling flowers, the long caravan finally arrived at the marble pulpit in front of the Great Sept of Bela. Viserys turned over and got off the horse, and the heavy wheels made a sound, and the gorgeous carriage carrying the bride also stopped in front of the steps. Gentleman Viserys took the initiative to lift the curtain and walked down from the carriage holding the soft hand of the Dawn Princess. Thunderous applause broke out at the scene, but Viserys did not stay for too long. With the Unsullied holding their shields and escorting him closely, he took his bride's hand and climbed the steps of the Great Sept of Bela and walked in through the main gate. The main nobles of the Seven Kingdoms who followed His Majesty the King from the Red Keep to surrender also dismounted and poured in through the side door. Next was the wedding of the king, which only the princes and nobles of the Seven Kingdoms could see. However, the civilians who were watching outside still did not disperse, and they surrounded the Great Sept of Bela and made a noisy sound. Among the crowd was an old man wearing a khaki coarse cloth robe with messy grey hair and wrinkles on his cheeks. His eyes were cold, watching Viserys' back as he left, especially lingering on the round figure of the Dawn Princess who flashed by in the crowd of Unsullied, and then slightly straightened his thin body. Viserys was holding Orion's hand and standing in the Hall of Lights of the Great Sept of Bela. It was a long corridor leading directly to the main hall. The ceiling was full of colorful lead glass bowls reflecting colorful light under the sunlight that penetrated from all around. "It's so beautiful here, my love." Irion blinked her beautiful eyes and couldn't help but speak. This was her first time in King's Landing, but not her first time in the Great Sept of Bila. However, the last time Irian came to this magnificent church with her confidants, the Sand Snake Sisters and the Unsullied Guards, she didn't feel so amazed. The reason was that this place now belonged to her completely. This was Irian's wedding, and who knew how many servants had polished these lead glass bowls again overnight. Viserys just smiled when he heard his fiance's words, but didn't say much, and squeezed her palm. Irian is a Dornishman. Dornish girls are wild. Although she is pregnant, she still uses other means to help Viserys release her pregnancy on the eve of her wedding. This character of Dornish girls may be related to the unique eating habits there. People in the borderlands say that Dornish food makes Dornish men hot-tempered and Dornish girls wild and wanton. Fire, pepper and other exotic spices make their blood heat up, and they can't control themselves. Irian is actually also a wild horse. Viserys once had certain preconceived notions about this girl. She is full of vitality and ambition. The Dornish princess regards Nymeria, the legendary female warrior of the Rhoynar, as her target. She believes that the glory of the legendary female warrior is so dazzling that she is no worse than any man, and she will follow Nymeria's example to compete with her brother Prince Quentyn Martell for the inheritance of Dorne. If she follows the original trajectory, she should now interpret her ambitions in Dorne, but Viserys conquered this girl from Dorne, and of noble birth. Finally, Irian put all her heart into Viserys. She was addicted to a certain mysterious quality unique to Viserys, which made her unpredictable and fascinated. Then the loud voice of the High Septon came from the main hall of the Great Sept of Bila. "Your Majesty." The servants in the Red Keep hurried over to inform Viserys that he could prepare to enter. The red-haired beauty following behind Viserys and Irian was almost nervous and her cheeks turned red. Sansa Stark tightly grasped Tyrion's long skirt, her mind filled with her mother's instructions to her before she left. "Since His Majesty has chosen you as a flower girl, Sansa, you must do your best, don't make any mistakes, and strive to be liked by the King and Queen." Chapter 482 Wedding. Before leaving, Catelyn Tully, the Lady of Winterfell, repeatedly told her eldest daughter that the woman attached great importance to Viserys' wedding this time, because she had learned about the existence of the public trial by visiting some of the relationships that her husband and father had left behind. Therefore, Catelyn spent all the means she could use during this period, running around and making connections, hoping to pass on the message to Viserys, so that her husband could get a way out, as long as he could live, whether it was wearing black clothes or being imprisoned. However, none of these means of activity was as surprising as when Viserys personally found the wolf girl Sansa Stark through the court steward, and asked her if she was willing to be a wedding flower girl. When Catelyn heard her daughter say this, it was like a desperate drowning person grabbing a piece of driftwood, and she must do her best to grab this last hope. Therefore, the Lady of Winterfell began to personally take part in the battle when she received the news, running around to rehearse the wedding process, to ensure that her daughter Sansa would not make any mistakes at the wedding scene, and strive to win the favor of the King and Queen. Of course, the like mentioned by Lady Catelyn Tully is not a love between men and women. Sansa has not even had her first period yet, and is even younger than the little Princess Daenerys. However, the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms have the habit of adopting each other's sons and daughters or servants. Catelyn's husband Eddard was once the adopted son of Jon Arryn, the Guardian of the Vale. If Sansa can win the Queen's favor and be adopted as a maid, or Robb can become the King's servant, it is worth it in exchange for her husband's freedom. The mutual adoption of sons and daughters or servants by the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms may seem similar to hostages, but in fact it is a win-win means of emotional exchange. The adopted sons and daughters will not be abused on the other side. If they can become the adopted children of the royal family, or the king's servant, the queen's maid is a symbol of honor. For example, Tywin once wanted to send his son Jaime to King's Landing as a servant of Prince Rhaegar, and Tywin's wife Jonah was once a maid of Queen Rhaela, Viserys' mother. Sansa, whether your father can survive depends on your performance this time. The Lady of Winterfell hugged her daughter, and begged her daughter with tears in her eyes, to behave well no matter what. Catelyn was undoubtedly a good mother, but she was too concerned. She could not accept that her husband was beheaded or hanged, so she did not know how much psychological pressure her words brought to her daughter Sansa. As a result, the red-haired beauty's mind went blank as she followed the king and the bride out slowly. Her cheeks flushed, and she did not even know which leg to take, and could only move forward with difficulty like a wooden man. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. There were many people at the wedding scene, and the crowd in the great sept of Bila was like an ocean, whispering to each other, and when Viserys came out, there was silence. The noble guests stood on both sides of the red carpet in the front with their family emblems on their chests. Because of well-known reasons, the parents of the new Liwats, Viserys and Irion, could not come, so Viserys invited his great-uncle Maester Aemon as his elder. Irion's uncle, Prince Oberyn, was supposed to attend as the elder of the bride's family, but for some special reasons, Oberyn had already led the army out of the capital. His mistress, Ilarius And, was not his legal wife, and was of humble origin, so she was not qualified to stand in the front of the king. Therefore, the court steward and Irion discussed, and simply cancelled the position of the elder on the bride's side. Fortunately, the bride's family was still present at the wedding. "Hey, sister." The clean-faced and black-haired boy stood at the edge of the red carpet and called quietly, squinting his eyes, and making a face, and was glanced at fiercely by Irion. Irion had been away from Dawn for a year or two. She had changed from aspiring to be a great queen of Dawn to a virtuous queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Prince Quentyn didn't know that his sister had once wanted to compete with him for the heir of Dawn. There would naturally be no conflict without conflict of interest, so the two still have a deep brother-sister relationship. Now Egan and Quentyn, two teenagers, were standing on the left and right of the red carpet, holding flower petals in their hands, and they looked at each other. The performance band was playing soothing and melodious music, following the steps of Viserys and Irion, and finally, when passing in front of the two teenagers, they threw petals in the air at the same time, and then the petals fell down. Viserys took Irion's hand and climbed the steps to the statues of the father and the mother. The fat archbishop wore a huge crystal crown on his head, his face was serious and sacred, and he recited the oath. The wedding ceremony in Westeros is very cumbersome and lengthy. The band withdrew and replaced it with a choir, composed of 77 monks. The new Liwat standing in front of the statues of the father and the mother will make 7 wedding vows, receive 7 blessings, and exchange 7 promises. Because the 7 gods worshipped by the church are actually 7 different forms of a god, representing 7 different virtues, the number 7 has been integrated into daily life on the continent of Westeros. For example, there are 7 members of the King's Guard, 7 pointed stars, 7 faces of God, 7 layers of hell, etc. Finally, the High Bishop asked if anyone had any doubts about this sacred marriage, but the audience was silent. This is one of the customs of the wedding in the 7 kingdoms. Then the fat High Bishop announced that under the gaze of the gods and the witness of all the adults, King Viserys of the Targaryen family and Princess Irion Martell from Dawn officially became husband and wife. Thunderous applause suddenly rang out below, and the bells of the Great Sept rang again, and echoed in King's Landing. This was the second time the bells of the Great Sept rang in a month. The people who were watching outside the Great Sept of Bila heard the bells and cheered warmly. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." The wedding ceremony ended, and Viserys took his queen to stand under the statues of the Father and the Virgin Mary, to accept the blessings and gifts of many nobles. There was another dinner party waiting for him tonight, but the wedding night prank was cancelled, because Viserys ordered that anyone who dared to prank would be killed by Mire with a sword. The whole wedding ended just like that, but the grey-haired old man who had just watched Viserys and Irion outside the cathedral. At this moment, in an inconspicuous corner not far from the cathedral, a group of ragged men and women gathered around them, with indignant expressions on their faces. Pregnant before marriage. The queen lost her virginity before the wedding. She cannot get the blessing of the Virgin Mary. Chapter 483 Dawn Army. The capitals of the 7 kingdoms were celebrating the king's wedding, and it was very lively. People seemed to have forgotten the war for a short time, and enjoyed the precious years of peace. In other parts of Westeros, although the large-scale war had ended, the other 4 lords of the Westerlands, the Vale, the Reach, and the Stormlands surrounded the occupied 3 rivers and the capital, but both sides lived in peace and tacitly recuperated. However, the war did not happen, but the small-scale conflicts did not end. The cavalry is back. The cavalry is back. The guards shouted from the camp, and then the heavy wooden door made a difficult sound and opened to both sides. A team of rangers wearing light armor and sandy yellow cloaks returned from the outside world. Whoa, the leading cavalry was stained with blood, and on his chest was a red and black emblem with a golden hand, which was the symbol of the Aryan family and the Grace City in Dawn. The cavalryman took off his helmet, revealing a face full of vicissitudes of life, then dismounted and handed the helmet and reins to a squire beside him. Father. Behind him, another Dornish ranger in armor also jumped off his horse, took off his helmet, revealing a young and tender face, and followed behind him. Demon. The middle-aged knight frowned slightly when he saw his illegitimate son following him without knowing the tact. I'm going to see Lord Ironwood, so don't follow me. Then he saw that his warhorse, which was led away by his servant, was covered in blood, and then he spoke. This horse was his precious treasure, like a piece of pure white silk, and he couldn't bear it to be covered in mud and stinky in the future. It just so happens that my warhorse is a little dirty. Go and brush it. The armor on the middle-aged man made a sound and walked away, ignoring the illegitimate son who was standing there blankly behind him. Although the status of bastards in Dawn has improved slightly, and they have been accepted, they still have no social status. Moreover, bringing your bastard to see your powerful father-in-law? If Sir Roger Arlian of God's grace is not stupid, he would not do such a thing. Ever since Viserys repelled the White Walkers and the war broke out with the coalition forces in the Twins, Dawn has been deploying troops. Although the news came back a little unprepared, and they did not expect to repel the White Walkers so quickly, they still cooperated with the Targaryen army to fight. The Dawn army was at the gates of the city, pinning down the armies of the Baratheon family and the Tyrell family, making it impossible for them to march north, to respond to King Robert's call, support the besieged King's Landing, and repel the Targaryen family's army. Now the commander of the Dawn army is Erlandus Ironwood, who is known as the Guardian of the Stone Road and the Blood Noble in Dawn. He is the most powerful family in Dawn except the Martell family, and the right-hand man of Prince Doran. He was once assigned by Prince Doran to lead a Dawn army as a delaying tactic to respond to King Robert's call, and go north to join the coalition forces to the wall to stop the Wildlings and the White Walkers. However, Erlandus Ironwood lost a foot, and fell down in the war against the White Walkers. Although he was rescued by the Dawn soldiers at all costs, the wound was eroded. In order to save his life, the Maester used a hot knife to cut off his injured left foot, and he became a cripple from then on. After the war, Erlandus Ironwood led the remnants of Dawn to break away from the coalition and return to Dawn. The Dawn army did not participate in the subsequent Battle of Winterfell and the Battle of Moat Cailin. After a long journey, they walked from the north of Westeros to the end of the south. The Dawn army finally returned to their hometown, and also brought back the true news of the White Walkers to Prince Doran. Anders told Prince Doran that at the end of the world, where the Dornish people might never go, there were terrible demons. They were carrying death and cold, trying to destroy the whole world. If no one could stop the other, the destruction of the world might be just a countdown. Prince Doran was still a little skeptical at that time, and asked his confidants what the legendary White Walkers looked like. However, Anders told him that the White Walkers were not legendary, but he saw them with his own eyes. If the prince wanted to ask what they looked like, how fast were they, how powerful were they, then Anders could only point to his lost left foot and the soldiers who survived Dawn by chance. Many of them had gone insane, and even committed suicide on the way back, and then told Prince Doran that they looked like death, nothing else. At this moment, in the silent tent of the commander of the Dornish army, Erlandus Ironwood sat behind the sand table, and stared quietly at the situation in front of him. Father. Then Roger Arryn opened the curtain and walked in. Roger's father-in-law was none other than the Stone Road Guardian, Erlandus Ironwood, who had lost one leg, and was now the commander of the Dawn army. He married Anders' daughter Rhaenys Ironwood, and they had 2 sons. Well, I'm back. Anders didn't even raise his head when his son-in-law returned from outside the camp. He still stared at the sand table in front of him with a sharp gaze, as if he was looking for a way to break through the obstacles. Although the Dawn army was coming fiercely, the attack was not very smooth in fact. After leaving the Prince's Pass, they faced the obstruction of Night Song City. The borderland seemed to have been prepared for the attack on Dawn. After all, this place was a battleground for military strategists in history, and was extremely sensitive. The borderland commander, Earl Bryce Cullen of Nightsong City, summoned many nobles of all sizes to help in the battle, and there were also troops from the Tyrrell family and the Baratheon family to support. The main armies of both sides fought for a long time here, and the cavalry of Dawn was sent out to harass the reinforcement of Stormland and Riverland, hijacking and cutting off their supply lines. They even went deep into the rich Riverland to burn, kill and loot, and burned down countless villages. This behavior completely angered the Rose of Highgarden. The Duke of Mace borrowed his uncle, the commander-in-chief of the Old Town garrison, Ser Morin Tyrrell, from his vassal, the Hightower family of Old Town, to lead troops to support. But the good news came just like that. We repelled the reinforcement of the Tyrrell family, Father, Roger Arian said. They set up an ambush on the road that the reinforcement had to pass, caught the Tyrrell family off guard, and temporarily repelled them. And there was an unexpected gain, and captured this little fat man. Then Ser Arian clapped his hands, and a trembling little fat man with a green-bottomed red coat and a walking hunter emblem on his chest was pushed in. The Dornish commander, Lord Dundas Ironwood, immediately looked at the emblem on his chest, then raised his head and spoke calmly. "Young man, introduce yourself." Chapter 484, Battle of Nightsong City. The reinforcement of the Tyrrell family were repelled, and the current Lord Samwell Tarly, Lord of Hornhill, was captured in the war and imprisoned in the Dornish camp. Since the former Lord Randall Tarly of Hornhill disappeared in the Battle of Riverrun, Samwell Tarly, the eldest son of the Tully family, became the new Lord of the Earl with the support of his mother. Dawn threatened to ask the Tully family's army to leave, otherwise they would kill their lord with a knife, and the Tully family's army had no choice but to withdraw. On the other hand, Dawn's victory news was frequent. The internal response that Lord Dundas Ironwood had planted in Nightsong a long time ago took advantage of the night to burn countless food and supplies in one breath, and then disappeared without a trace. The commander of the borderland, Bryce Cullen, was furious and vowed to find this internal ghost. He hanged more than 30 people including the warehouse guards and the steward in one breath, but he did not find the whereabouts of Dawn's spy. However, finding the spy is not the most important thing now, but what to eat next. There are many troops in Nightsong City, but the supply is insufficient. Although they can ask for help from their feudal lord Renly, it is too far away, and they have to face the harassment of Dornish cavalry. Therefore, Earl Bryce Cullen was forced to open the city gate and go out of the city for a decisive battle. The two sides started a battle under Nightsong City. Then the horn sounded, and a fierce war broke out. The Dornish people prefer round shields made of metal. The endless Dornish army, holding shields, spears, or short javelins, rushed towards the army of the borderland, while the archers of Dawn held double-arc longbows, then put arrows on them, and pulled the bowstrings. Bang bang bang, the black rain of arrows fell down like an overwhelming storm. The soldiers of the borderland held up their shields to block the rain of arrows, and the arrows fell on the shields and made a crisp sound. Puff, but there were still stray arrows that penetrated the shield formation and fell into the crowd below. Then there were screams and the soldiers fell to the ground. Kill. The soldiers from the borderland of the Dawn army fought back tenaciously, and the shouts of killing shook the earth. This was the largest war that Westeros had experienced since the Battle of Riverrun a few months ago. Both sides had invested tens of thousands of troops in fighting each other. Demon Sand, the bastard of God's grace, shook a scimitar and charged forward, cutting the throats of two borderland soldiers in one breath. He hoped to get his father's recognition instead of being sent to brush horses again. However, at this moment, an ugly knight with measles all over his face suddenly rushed out from the side of Demon Sand. He was wearing dark golden armor and holding a sword and shield, and was extremely brave. "Come here, the bastard of God's grace. Dare you fight me?" He recognized Demon Sand's identity. Demon's father, as the commander of the Dawn Rangers, had caused trouble for the nobles of the borderlands during this period, repeatedly harassing supplies and burning villages. The bastard Demon Sand of God's grace often followed his father. Although he was young, he was brave in battle, so he also won some fame in this war. Lord Rolland, seeing the knight in dark gold armor stand up and take the initiative to challenge the opponent's good player, cheers suddenly rang out in the army of the borderlands. His name is Rolland Storm, who is also a bastard. He is the bastard of Sir Baron Cullen, the former lord of the Cullen family, and the half-brother of the current Lord Bryce Cullen. He is called the bastard of Nightsong City. He is also a brave warrior, and was once called an experienced killer by Anders Ironwood, the commander of Dawn. The young Dawnish warrior Demon Sand was also arrogant. Hearing the provocation of the ugly knight in front of him, especially the emphasis on the bastard of God's grace, he immediately flew into a rage. Roland. Come on. A showdown. Then Demon Sand waved his scimitar and rode towards Roland Storm. The bastard of Nightsong City was wearing heavy plate armor, his feet firmly on the ground, his face calm. He threw away the shield in his hand and replaced it with both hands to hold the long sword in his hands. Kill. Then, with a roar like thunder, the weapons of the two collided heavily. Clang. Roland Storm was very strong, and he split Demon Sand's scimitar with a powerful sword, and at the same time, he chopped off the head of his warhorse with a backhand sword. Without even a painful neigh, the hot blood poured all over his body like a fountain, and the heavy body of the warhorse fell to the ground. Demon Sand fell to the ground on horseback, and was knocked unconscious. Stars appeared in front of his eyes. He spat out the sand in his mouth, and before he could stand up again, Roland Storm strode towards him with a sword in hand. Spare my life. Surrender. I surrender. Demon Sand saw this scene, and immediately knelt on the ground, and raised his hands high to beg for mercy, but he didn't expect Roland Storm to ignore him at all. He raised the long sword in his hand high, and then fell straight down. Puff, a sword cut off his head, blood spurted out, and the body fell to the ground. The bastard of Nightsong City killed the bastard of God's Grace City with his own hands. However, although the border army won the Battle of the Bastards, it did not win this war. The reinforcement from the Reach were hit and temporarily retreated, and the supplies were not up to paragraph. The army of the borderland was able to hold out for so long with fewer troops. However, war is ultimately based on the quality and quantity of soldiers, weapons, and equipment, and logistical supplies. Although strategies can affect the war to a certain extent, it is ultimately a competition of real strength. The nobles of the borderland experienced a tragic defeat, lost Nightsong, and were forced to retreat to Black Harbor in the rear. The Dawn army only chased for a while, but did not continue to pursue and expand the results of the battle. Instead, it headed northwest to Highgarden, as a castle with roads extending in all directions on the plains of the Reach, and facing a large river. Highgarden is recognized as the most beautiful castle in the Seven Kingdoms. The entire castle is built of white marble, and is full of art, music, and culture. Countless poems, music, and novels often use this place as the background, telling the knight's martial arts, morality, and loyalty, and the love story of pursuing beautiful noble ladies. However, Highgarden now faces the Dawnish army without any strong natural barriers or tall walls to defend it. After the defeat of Nightsong, this most beautiful castle in the Seven Kingdoms suddenly fell into a precarious situation. Chapter 485 Current Situation of Stormland. The Dawnish army made a breakthrough, breaking through the borderlands and besieging Highgarden, the capital of the Reach. Willis Tyrrell, the heir of the Tyrrell family, replaced his father as the commander of Highgarden, personally climbed the city wall to command and strengthen the defense. While strengthening the defense, the Tyrrell family also released ravens to ask for help from the most wealthy and powerful vassal, the Hightower family of Oldtown, hoping that they could lead their vassals and soldiers to lift the siege of Highgarden. As one of the oldest and proudest nobles in the history of Westeros, the Hightower family can trace its bloodline back to the ancestors like the Stark family, and was once king in the Dawn Age. However, since then, the Hightower family has not resisted the invasion of the Andals, but assisted them, and later surrendered to the successive kings of the Reach, giving up the crown in exchange for attaining the ancient privileges and status. Although the masters of the towering towers are powerful and extremely wealthy, they prefer trade, dislike war, and rarely participate in the civil war in Westeros. However, in this siege of Highgarden, the Hightower family, who have always had a keen eye for investment, and are famous for their ability to stand in line, responded to the call of the feudal lord. It seems that they are determined to stand on the side of the traditional nobles, to resist the will of the Iron Throne. Since they received the Raven, they have sent a new army to Highgarden, Heavy troops gathered here, and the sky over the rich reach was suddenly shrouded in thick clouds of war. King's Landing has just ended a grand wedding, and the reach is surging. Dawn won a great victory in the Battle of Night Song, and then surrounded Highgarden. These are all recent events, and have not yet spread. In the Stormlands adjacent to the river bay, the Baratheon family should have been the most active response after King's Landing was captured, striving to retake the capital and the king imprisoned in prison, but Storm's End became silent, as if it was indifferent to the news from the outside world. When Rhaenys personally led the Golden Company to besiege King's Landing, Renly promised Jaime to send an army to support King's Landing, but no one knew where the reinforcement had gone. Storm's End is only a short distance from King's Landing, and when King's Landing fell, no soldiers from the Baratheon family came. Perhaps they heard the news that King's Landing had fallen when they were halfway there, and then turned back. The entire Stormlands has been offline since the return of the Targaryen army, waiting to die. This time, Dawn's troops preparing to break through the border attracted the attention of the Stormlands. After Renly sent out a reinforcement army to escort some supplies, there was no sound again. However, it was not that Renly did not want to take the initiative to do something, but that the situation in Storm's End was more complicated than outsiders imagined. Since the defeat and disbandment of the coalition forces after the Battle of Riverrun, Stannis was defeated and captured on the battlefield. However, his importance was not as high as that of King Robert and the Warden of the North, Eddard Stark. He was watched 24 hours a day, so the supervision was not strong and slightly negligent. Stannis' aide, the Onion Knight Davos Seaworth, was loyal to him. After escaping from the battlefield, he hired a group of mercenaries and had been planning to rescue Stannis. Finally, he successfully kidnapped Stannis in King's Landing. However, Stannis was kidnapped from the prison in King's Landing by his subordinates, but there was no suitable place to go. His fiefdom, Dragonstone, had long been occupied by the Targaryen family's army. Now he had no soldiers or generals, let alone money, so he was forced to return to his hometown, Storm's End, and join his brothers. The current Duke of Storm's End is Stannis' younger brother, Renly Baratheon, who is only 15 years old. He heard that his brother had returned without any precautions. He welcomed his second brother home, and even held a banquet to welcome his brother. But this young man who had no precautions at the time may regret it now. Stannis is actually not as fair as others say. He is a serious and humorless person. He does not know hypocrisy and does not flatter. However, he also has selfishness, but it is shrouded in a tough and indifferent appearance, making it difficult for people to see through. Renly was canonized as a Duke of Storm's End. When the three brothers of the Baratheon family separated, he was only a few years old, so in fact, it is difficult to say how deep the relationship between the brothers is. The simple-minded boy warmly welcomed his brother, while Stannis was a wolf in the sheepfold. Although he had an injury on his knee and could not stand for a long time, he quickly occupied a place in Storm's End with his wrists and won over many former ministers. Because Stannis held the city for a year during the Usurpers' War 10 years ago, he has an unparalleled reputation in Storm's End. Moreover, the two brothers are only at odds with each other and have not publicly turned against each other. Stannis is also a Baratheon, so many of Renly's vassals secretly flirt with Stannis and do not have any psychological burden. However, for Renly now, he realized that it was too late to realize his brother's ambition. As the nominal Lord of the Stormlands and the Duke of Storm's End, he has lost control of nearly half of his power. If he turns against his brother now, he will probably face the situation of the Stormlands being torn apart in an instant. Renly's staff once gave him two options. The first was to persuade him to strike first and send assassins to seize the opportunity to kill Stannis and not to drag his feet. Otherwise things will become more and more troublesome. However, Renly was hesitant in the face of this proposal, because in the faith of the seven gods, parricide is an extremely serious sin. Even if Renly doesn't care, he can't stop people from talking. The second option proposed by the staff is to surrender to the Iron Throne, hand over Storm's End and even the Stormlands without a single soldier, in exchange for the Iron Throne's forgiveness for Renly and even the Baratheon family. Observing the way Viserys dealt with Cersei, the former queen was still able to live in the Red Keep, and Tyrion was also accepted into the royal council. If Renly handed over Storm's End, He should be able to get some benefits, and at worst he could save his life. However, Renly was also hesitant about the second option, and he couldn't make up his mind, because kneeling down and surrendering was equivalent to sticking his head under someone else's knife, and life and death would be left to fate. So he tentatively released some news to see how the Iron Throne would react. But to his disappointment, the Iron Throne did not react at all. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 486, A Letter from Viserys. However, at this critical moment, a letter from King's Landing broke the strange atmosphere in Storm's End. Fluttering, a raven with black feathers fluttered down from the sky, landing on a high tower of Storm's End with its wings spread out. Then a servant notified two Maesters and they hurried over. Maester Cresson, there is a letter from King's Landing. The Maester of Storm's End fed the raven some food, and while the raven was eating snacks, he skillfully untied the letter tied to his leg, unfolded it and took a look at the seal, and then his face changed slightly. What? On the other side, an old Maester also changed his face when he heard the words of the young Maester. He took the letter from the other party and took a look. The wax seal of the letter clearly had a three-headed dragon emblem, and there was a touch of gold on the edge, which directly indicated the identity of the writer. Is this a letter from Viserys? Who is the young dragon writing this letter to? Maester Cresson and Maester Storm's End asked almost at the same time, but Maester Cresson addressed him as Viserys, while Maester Storm's End addressed him as Young Dragon. On the envelope of this letter, it was clearly written, "Please forward it to the Master of Storm's End." Who is the Master of Storm's End? The answer is self-evident. The two Maesters looked at each other, and then the Maester Storm's End took the letter from the old Maester Cresson, nodded slightly, and then walked down the steps of the tower, and went straight to Renly's study. Maester Cresson stood on the tower, and watched the back of the younger Maester, his demise flashing. This letter. It was obvious that the old Maester, who was over 70 years old, was still in his mind, and he boasted that he was experienced and had eaten more salt in his life than they had eaten rice. He felt that there must be something strange about this matter. Why did Viserys secretly write to Renly? As mortal enemies, what could they communicate about? What would Viserys write in the letter? And since Viserys would write to Renly now, did that mean Renly had written to Viserys before, and this was just a reply from him? Maester Cresson, with grey hair, stood on the high tower holding the railing, his brain spinning rapidly. In addition, thinking of the sudden news that Renly had contacted Viserys and asked what kind of treatment he would get if Storm's End knelt, Maester Cresson felt that he was getting closer and closer to the truth of the matter. Not good. Then the old Maester's face suddenly changed. If it was really as he imagined, then Viserys and Renly's conspiracy must be against Stannis. Although the old Maester, as a former Maester of Storm's End, treated the three children of the Baratheon family equally, he also liked Renly very much. Cresson followed Stannis to Dragonstone because he felt sorry for the child. He defended the castle for more than a year and made the greatest contribution, but he got the least result. He was canonized to the Baron Dragonstone. The old Maester felt that Stannis needed him the most. Maester Cresson treated the three children of the Baratheon family as his own children. Robert was now in prison, and the other two brothers should join hands to fight the enemy, instead of fighting for power and profit, or even being separated by their enemies and killing each other. Renly has gone astray. No, I should inform Stannis as soon as possible and let him stop Renly. Maester Cresson felt that he was overthinking after just a short while. Cold sweat even oozed out of his forehead and his nose was a little red. The old Maester was indeed not young anymore, and he still had an injury on his butt. Then he hurried down from the tower and ran straight to Stannis' bedroom, and even almost fell on the way. Maester Cresson, what's wrong with you? What's the hurry? Maester Cresson ran into Davos before he even reached Stannis' bedroom. The Onion Knight quickly supported Maester Cresson, who was about to fall, and asked curiously, I want to find Stannis. Take me to Stannis and tell him that Renly wants to kill him. Maester Cresson was supported by Davos and panted slightly. His wrinkled old face was still red. He grabbed Davos' hand and spoke in a hurry. What? Mr. Crescent's words scared Davos, and he almost turned around and ran to Stannis' bedroom. But fortunately, the Onion Knight was a naturally cautious person. He thought about it calmly and felt that this matter was unlikely. Although the power that Lord Stannis holds is not as strong as Lord Renly's, it is not much weaker. Renly wants to kill Lord Stannis at this juncture. Isn't it a matter of pain for his relatives and pleasure for his enemies? Moreover, according to the belief of the seven gods, the Kinslayer will inevitably be punished by the gods. According to Davos's understanding of Renly during this period, he is not a man of firm will and decisiveness. How could he make up his mind to kill Lord Stannis at this time, risking a civil war? And he still has the courage to be a Kinslayer? This matter is of great importance, Mr. Crescent. We must not act rashly, otherwise it will easily breed misunderstandings. Davos calmed down and spoke in a steady voice. What happened? Why don't you come and tell Lord Stannis in person? Then Davos called a guard and asked him to help Mr. Crescent to find Stannis. Come here. And he cautiously summoned all the guards loyal to Stannis and protected the bedroom where Stannis lived. It's better to be safe than sorry. Although Davos instinctively felt that this matter could not happen, there was no ability to predict the future in this world, so who could be so sure? But once negligent, the end of this game of power would inevitably be shattered. In Stannis' bedroom, he put on his armor and was about to go out to train soldiers. Then he heard what Mr. Crescent said and also felt that there was something fishy about this matter. What? There is such a thing? Stannis frowned slightly. He was a bit suspicious by nature. Viserys wrote a letter to Renly? What did he write? Stannis once saw Viserys in person in the war meeting room of the twins. According to his understanding, Viserys was not a person who had nothing to do. He would definitely not write something insignificant to Renly. And since it was an important matter, why didn't Renly come to discuss it with him after receiving the letter for so long? Mr. Crescent, you came at the right time. No, I have to go to Renly to ask clearly. Chapter 487 Brotherly Fight. Although Stannis has a firm character and never flinched in adversity, he tends to think too much, and once a person thinks too much, problems are likely to arise. Don't employ a person who you doubt, and don't doubt a person who you employ. There are two people Stannis trusts the most. One is Mr. Crescent, who has watched him grow up and treated him as his own son. The other is Sir Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight who has saved his life twice. It can be said that, if there was no Onion Knight, Stannis would have starved to death when he was besieged by the Tyrell army 10 years ago. Therefore, he has always regarded Davos as his most trusted confidant, and Davos also repaid Stannis' trust in him and saved his life again. Now Stannis heard what Mr. Crescent said, and the more he thought about it, the more he felt that there was something wrong with this matter. I'll go to Renly to ask clearly. Stannis was wearing armor and preparing to go out to train soldiers, and then he took his sword from the wall and hung it on his waist. Stannis was also afraid that, if he went to see his brother Ashley, he would be in danger, so he brought several loyal guards with him. In order to prevent misunderstandings, he left Sir Davos here and told him that, if there was any accident there, he should lead all the guards who had surrendered to him in Storm's End to come here immediately. Although the Onion Knight did not know what Mr. Crescent had said to Stannis, since he saw that Lord Stannis was ready to ask Lord Renly for punishment, he did not dare to neglect it and agreed immediately. Yes, sir. Stannis saw that Davos went down to prepare without any delay and nodded slightly with satisfaction. Although Davos was just a smuggler, his ability to do things has always been outstanding, and he has a strong practical ability, which has never let him down, so Stannis was also relieved to keep him. Then the fully armed Stannis led several guards and hurried to Renly's study. On the other side, a young man with long black hair and a clean face was sitting upright on a chair, looking at the white paper in his hand in a daze, then hesitant for a moment, and then asked, "Sir Donald, you said, why did the young dragon send me a piece of white paper?" Donald Swan is the eldest son and heir of Earl Gullion Swan of Stonerhelm. His father is now staying in his hometown due to illness, and has appointed his eldest son to serve in Storm's End and represent Stonerhelm with full authority. This, my lord, please forgive me. When Donald heard Renly's question, he also showed a puzzled expression on his face and scratched his hair. He didn't know why Viserys sent Renly a piece of white paper. Is Viserys very idle? Why did he send this piece of white paper when he had nothing to do? My lord, something bad has happened. At this time, there was a knock on the door outside Renly's study. A guard from Storm's End came to Renly with a nervous look and told him that something unusual had suddenly happened on Stannis' side. What? Renly's face suddenly changed after hearing the guard's words. Stannis' confidant, the Onion Knight Davos, suddenly gathered all the guards who had surrendered to Stannis for some unknown reason. And Stannis himself, wearing helmet and armor, led several guards and rushed over aggressively. Since the two brothers had been in open and secret conflict, Renly had learned a lesson, and the young man, who had not yet grown up, had realized the dangers of human hearts. Although he had not yet decided whether to surrender to Viserys or take the initiative to eliminate his second brother, he sent guards to secretly monitor Stannis and report to him immediately if there was any movement. And now Stannis suddenly gathered guards and came to the door aggressively wearing helmet and armor. What did he want to do? Said Donald. Quick, notify all the guards to come. The black-haired boy thought of this and immediately pushed the table and stood up from behind the tabletop and spoke in a hurried tone. No matter what Stannis wants to do, you must be on guard against others. Donald Swan heard Renly's order and didn't know what happened, but he didn't dare to neglect it and turned around and ran out. Yes, Lord Renly. The situation in Storm's End has reached a point of panic during this period. Although the conflict between the brothers Renly and Stannis has not been completely exposed, it is already known to everyone. Everyone knows that this conflict will erupt sooner or later. It is for this reason that the delivery of Viserys' letter caused such a big wave of exaggeration. At this moment, for the city of Storm's End, any slight movement will provoke the sensitive nerves of both sides. Because of the strong pressure exerted by Viserys in King's Landing, coupled with the envoys from the Lannister family from afar, many Stormland nobles have gathered in Storm's End at this moment to discuss how to deal with it. Is it to unite the Riverlands, the Westerlands and the Vale to fight against the Targaryen family together, or choose to kneel and surrender? However, just when this matter had been going on for so long without a result, the two brothers Stannis and Renly suddenly summoned their loyal vassals, and they were ready to start a civil war. Quick, quick. Donald Swan brought guards and nobles loyal to Renly, and Stannis also rushed over at this time. My dear second brother, what are you going to do? Renly also put on his armor with the help of his servants, and grasped the hilt of his sword. He saw said Donald also coming with his guards, and his heart suddenly became more confident. His swordsmanship was also acceptable. He turned his head and looked at Stannis and asked, "You want to kill me and seize the Storm's End that you have always dreamed of?" Renly's words directly choked Stannis, who was ready to charge him, and the guards and nobles loyal to both sides immediately focused their attention on Stannis. No matter what, in this era, kinslaying is an absolutely unforgivable crime, and this time it was Stannis who started the conflict. Watch your words, Renly. That joke is not funny at all. Stannis clenched the hilt of his sword slightly. Although he was telling a joke, there was not a trace of smile on his face. Instead, he was indifferent. His eyes stared at his younger brother, as if he was looking at an enemy. Storm's End is my home. It is not something I dream of. It should have been mine. 10 years ago, when I was struggling to defend Storm's End, you were just a little kid playing with pea and mud. Chapter 488, Civil War at Storm's End. The black-haired boy in armor had a mocking smile on his face, but after hearing what Stannis said, the last smile on his face disappeared, leaving only anger. However, before Renly could refute him, Stannis continued to speak. Besides, Renly, you know what you did very well. It's not me who wants to kill you, but you want to kill me now. I received news that the son of the Mad King wrote you a secret letter. What did it say? If you have a clear conscience, you might as well take it out and let the lords have a look. Stannis said with a sneer on his face, holding the hilt of the sword. What? There is such a thing. When Stannis spoke, all the nobles and guards of the Stormlands looked at each other and then focused their eyes on Renly. Viserys wrote a secret letter to Renly? Why did he write a letter to Renly? What would be in the letter? Why did Lord Renly never mention it? Yes, Viserys wrote a secret letter to Lord Renly. If the contents can be seen by others, why don't you dare to make it public? A noble who stood on Stannis' side immediately agreed, and more Stormland nobles and even those who were loyal to Renly nodded slightly. Why did they gather at Storm's End? Wasn't it to unite to resist Viserys' pressure? Whether it was war or peace, they would fight to the end, to defend the dignity and honor of the nobles, and if it was peace, they would unite to negotiate with Viserys. They asked him to guarantee respect for the traditional rights of the nobles, and never allow any lowly born mud-legged people to have the opportunity to be called lord with them in the future. However, now that Renly and Viserys have secretly contacted each other in private, how can these nobles tolerate the betrayal of their own lords? When Renly heard Stannis' words, his face changed slightly, and then he heard some nobles agreeing, and a strong sense of shame and anger suddenly surged in his heart. As the Lord of Stormlands and the Duke of Storm's End, what qualifications do these people have to order him to hand over his private letters? Isn't this a great shame? At the same time, Renly also had a bad premonition. He seemed to sense Viserys' evil intentions. But Renly was about to deny the existence of the letter, but then he remembered that the envelope was placed in the study behind him, and he hadn't had time to deal with it. If the lie was exposed, it would be even more difficult to deal with. So Renly could only hold his breath for the time being, holding the hilt of the sword tightly, and confessed with a red face. Yes, Viserys did write me a letter. But there is no content in this letter, only a blank piece of paper. Unfortunately, Renly's tolerance did not win Stannis' tolerance. He was very vindictive and never good at forgiving others. Instead, he took a step closer and walked in front of Renly with his hand on the hilt of the sword. A pair of eyes looked at his younger brother coldly until Renly's eyes were a little erratic, and then he spoke calmly. "You are still the same as before, Renly." "What?" Renly was a little flustered by his brother's gaze, and his eyes could not help but wonder. In fact, he did not like his second brother since he was a child. His eldest brother Robert was generous and often took Renly out to play. His second brother Stannis had a stern face every day and even threw away all the beautiful stones he collected on the beach. This became a shadow of Renly's childhood. "When you lie, your eyes will wander." Stannis suddenly spoke at this time. "You have been like this since you were a child. Your father and mother died very early, and they didn't have time to take care of you before they died. Every time you did something wrong, Robert was busy with those bitches and drinking, and didn't care about you. I was the only one who kept disciplining you, fearing that you would go astray. But I didn't expect that after I went to Dragonstone for a few years, you neglected discipline and still went astray." Stannis' voice was regretful, and he looked at Renly with a pair of cold eyes, as if he never knew what it was to be happy. Then he raised his voice, and roared in a low voice. "Do you think I and the adults are all fools? Viserys just put a blank piece of paper in the envelope for you?" Renly was caught off guard by Stannis' sudden attack, and he subconsciously lowered his head in front of his brother. However, Renly is no longer the child who allowed Stannis to discipline him. He is now 15 years old, and in the rebellious period, Renly was scolded by Stannis and immediately became furious and refuted loudly. "I'm not lying. Viserys only put a piece of white paper in the envelope he gave me. Now the paper is in the study. If you don't believe me, go in and take a look." But unfortunately, no one believed Renly's words. There were so many pieces of white paper in the study that Renly could just pick out a piece of paper and say it was a letter from Viserys. His words even made the nobles who were already loyal to Renly look suspicious. Viserys stuffed a piece of white paper into an envelope for no reason? This kind of thing could only fool a 15 or 16-year-old child. However, Renly saw that there were more and more suspicious eyes around him, and he also knew that something was wrong. If he let things continue to develop, he was afraid that before he could resist, all the remaining people would turn against him, and then he would be in danger. Clang. So Renly was decisive for a rare time, and immediately drew the long sword at his waist, and pointed it directly at his second brother. "Stannis is confusing right and wrong and wants to kill me to seize Storm's End. Take him." Renly gave an order. Although there were doubts on the faces of those nobles, they still served Renly after all. They hesitated for a moment, but the guards loyal to Renly would not hesitate. They didn't care about letters or the bullshit principles between nobles. They were only loyal to their master. Since Renly ordered them to capture Stannis, they went up. Stannis had very few people, only 4 or 5 guards, but they were not afraid and drew their long swords at their waists. Kill him. Kill. Ding ding. A fierce battle broke out between the two sides in Storm's End. And those nobles who were in hesitation saw this scene and knew that they could not stand idly by and had to stand on the side at this time. So they chose to join one of the two Baratheon brothers, drew their long swords, and joined the battle. Stannis' reinforcement also arrived not far away. Onion Knight Davos gathered his guards and had been observing the situation. When he saw the two sides fighting, he quickly led the guards to join the battle. The two sides were evenly matched. Chapter 489, GD Comeback. Kill. The brothers of the Baratheon family fought fiercely, and almost all the guards, nobles, and servants who stayed in Storm's End participated in it. Some people even took away some gold and silver jewelry and fled, while the unarmed children, maids and old women were in trouble. There were sounds of fighting and crying everywhere. Puff puff puff. Donal Swan, the heir of Stonerhelm, was shot into a sieve by arrows, holding a bloody sword with disbelief on his face. He was the eldest son of his father Gullion Swan and the next Earl of Stonerhelm, but he didn't expect that he would be buried in the civil strife of the Baratheon family before he became the Earl. Then Sir Donal's body fell in a pool of blood and was trampled under the feet of both sides in the melee. On the other side, the Onion Knight Davos had only one hand wielding a long sword and killed a guard loyal to Renly with difficulty and then was kicked to the ground by a knight from behind. Plop, go to hell. This knight is Sir Jon Wilder from the Wilder family in Rainhouse City, and now he is loyal to Lord Renly Baratheon of the Stormlands. He killed 2 of Stannis' guards in a row and then set his sights on Davos Seaworth. Everyone who knows Stannis knows that this man nicknamed the Onion Knight is his right-hand man. Jon Wilder's armor was covered with blood. He kicked Davos down from behind, then raised his long sword high and prepared to kill the Onion Knight. Davos was shocked when he saw this scene. After eating a mouthful of soil, he hurriedly picked up the long sword that fell to the side and raised it to block Sir Jon Wilder's sword. Clang! The collision of the long swords made a loud sound. Davos rolled on the ground in embarrassment and once again avoided Jon Wilder's pursuit. Although the Onion Knight is an experienced smuggler, he is not an excellent swordsman. He was not very good at fighting since he was a child and was often beaten black and blue by other people in Flea Bottom. However, Davos had an advantage, that he was very eloquent and loyal. He could persuade a large group of young boys to help him and soon led them to fight back. Because of this, many thieves, robbers, and grey forces in King's Landing were Davos' former partners. Die. The knights of the Wilder family continued to chase Davos and wanted to kill him. However, at this time, Davos, who was fleeing in a panic, suddenly grabbed a handful of dirt from the ground and threw it directly on Jon Wilder's face. Shit. The knight cursed in an angry tone, and his eyes were blinded by the dust and he couldn't open his eyes. Davos seized this opportunity and pierced Jon Wilder's chest with his long sword in his hand. Puff! The Onion Knight raised his sword in one hand. He killed the knight of the Wild family, then kicked his body to the ground, drew his sword, gasped, and looked around at the battle situation. There were sounds of fighting everywhere, but Stannis did not have any advantage now. Although Stannis' words just now successfully shook many nobles on Renly's side, there were still more people loyal to the other side. After all, Renly was a Duke of Storm's End in name and reason. And in the core area of the battlefield, the two Baratheon brothers, Stannis and Renly, were fighting one-on-one. Clang! The two long swords collided head-on without any fancy moves, and the harsh metal collision sound was particularly clear in the chaotic battlefield. You are not my opponent, Renly. Stannis held the long sword and calmly and steadily blocked Renly's attack. The two long swords were wrestling against each other. His eyes were fixed on the younger brother in front of him, and he spoke in a cold voice. Surrender as soon as possible, and I can spare your life. However, Renly just sneered. He usually trained with the instructor of Storm's End, and his swordsmanship was pretty good. He was in a period of arrogance. That's what I want to say to you, brother. Then the two wrestled. The young man with the golden staghorn helmet on his head suddenly pushed forward and actually pushed away Stannis, who was in his prime, forcing him to step back a few steps. Is this all you can do, my dear second brother? Renly stood there holding the hilt of the sword, sneered and mocked twice. Stannis's face was a little ugly, and he grasped the hilt of the sword with his hand and spoke in a hoarse voice. For the first time, he realized that his little brother, who was not very noticeable at the beginning, had become so difficult to deal with. If it were a real battlefield, you would have been beheaded by now, Renly. I warn you for the last time, put down your weapons, kneel down and surrender, otherwise I will not show mercy next time. However, Stannis' words certainly would not make Renly kneel down and surrender. The young knight with exquisite swordsmanship just snorted coldly and then attacked his brother again. No use talking. Clang clang clang. Then the two brothers started a fierce one-on-one fight on the battlefield. Renly has been systematically trained by the coach of Storm's End, and with his innate fencing talent, his swordsmanship is indeed more fancy and sharp than Stannis. He even suppressed Stannis, a veteran of the battlefield, and Stannis' swordsmanship is all based on direct combat. Swish, Renly's long sword suddenly seized the opportunity to cut Stannis' thigh, leaving a long wound on the outside of his thigh. Stannis' knee was injured, and although it has recovered a lot after so long, it is still a bit inconvenient. The thigh injury made Stannis, who was already at a disadvantage, even worse. He was a little shaky standing there. Are you tired, my dear second brother? Then Renly stepped forward again, and knocked the long sword out of Stannis' hand. He kicked him at the injured place behind his knee, causing Stannis to groan in pain, and fall to one knee with a thud. Renly now had the opportunity to kill Stannis directly, but when his sword was aimed at the back of Stannis' neck, he hesitated slightly. He had already thought that, if he stabbed with this sword, he would be labeled as a kinslayer, and would have a foothold in the Seven Kingdoms, perhaps even more notorious than the Kingslayer Jaime Lannister. Surrender, my brother. Renly hesitated slightly, and after a short distraction, family affection finally defeated hatred. He reached out to Stannis. However, at this moment, Stannis suddenly pulled out a dagger from an inconspicuous place on his waist and stabbed it directly into Renly's chest. Puff, blood spurted out immediately. Chapter 490, Death of Renly. Puff, the black-haired boy with the antler helmet on his head widened his eyes. He watched his brother stab the dagger into his chest with disbelief on his face. Then, along with Renly's rapid breathing, blood instantly surged up and flowed out of his nose, mouth, ears, and eyes. Brother, you. At this moment, Renly felt that his lungs seemed to have become a broken bellows, and breathing became extremely difficult, but he still had to breathe hard. He stared at his brother intently, as if he wanted to say something, but the blood that kept pouring out filled his trachea, making him unable to say anything. I told you, Renly, you are not my opponent. Stannis covered his injured thigh with one hand. His body was also covered with blood, and he staggered and stood up with difficulty. He panted slightly, then looked at his young brother and spoke, his eyes full of determination. This is a real battlefield. It's not a fight between children, nor is it a jousting. Only those who hold out to the end can win. Never let down your guard before you break the enemy's neck. Stannis panted and said hoarsely, Renly, you are too young, you don't know anything. Stannis turned the tide in desperation and suddenly killed Renly. This move shocked everyone present. All the nobles and guards present were stunned, as if they had not expected that the young Duke Renly Baratheon of Storm's End would die here. When Maester Cresson, an old minister of Storm's End, hurriedly arrived, he witnessed the scene where Stannis stabbed the dagger into Renly's chest. Stop! He just shouted, but it was too late. Maester Cresson did not expect that Stannis would actually kill his own brother. The old Maester almost fainted. He knew that he had indeed made a big mistake. On the chaotic battlefield, Stannis suddenly rebelled and killed Renly, making the entire battlefield quiet in an instant. Then an old earl with grey hair shouted at Stannis. Stannis, what are you doing? You killed your own brother? The Kinslayer will become a stain on his honor for life. It violates the creed of the seven gods, and is not tolerated by the secular world. Stannis' behavior is indeed shocking. But Stannis ignored him. He held Renly's body, which was gradually losing its temperature, and slowly put him on the ground. Stannis stared at his brother's cheek, then raised his hand to help Renly close his eyes, and then raised his head to look at the old man who had just spoken, and said in a low voice, Old Earl Esmond, Renly wants to kill me, why can't I kill him? You are talking nonsense. Renly has clearly shown mercy to your men. Earl Esmond's grey beard trembled, and he still shouted angrily. Lord Esmond. Stannis suddenly raised his voice, interrupted the other party, looked at the Lord of Greenston with a sharp gaze, and then spoke loudly. Renly is colluding with Viserys in private. He wants to kill me and all the lords present, and then give up the Stormlands. Stannis looked around, and all the guards and nobles who were touched by his eyes lowered their heads involuntarily. Then Stannis' eyes fell on Lord Elton Esmond again. I met Ser Aemon on the battlefield of Riverrun. Stannis' words completely deflated the grey-haired old earl, like a deflated ball. Aemon Esmond was the son of Elton and the heir to Greenston, but he died on the battlefield of the Battle of Riverrun. He wanted to be a hero, and killed Viserys alone, but was easily killed by Viserys. Just because of this hatred, Elton would never surrender to Viserys. Renly's collusion with Viserys hit the old earl's heart. HMPH. Even so, I will not surrender to the Kinslayer. Elton Esmond, wearing blood-stained armor, and holding a long sword, strode out. The guards who surrendered to Stannis wanted to stop him, but were scared away by Elton's glare. What? Kinslayer, you dare not let me go. Stannis looked at Elton's back as he left, his face slightly livid, but he did not dare to stop him, and could only clench his fists tightly. After all, there are still many nobles present, and each of them has a lot of guards. If Stannis kills Elton, it will inevitably lead to a tragic ending. However, after Stannis killed Renly, he actively tried to win over the other nobles in the Stormlands, but the effect was not ideal. Many nobles who witnessed Stannis killing Renly could not accept it, and even secretly called him Kinslayer. The old and new gods will curse the Kinslayer forever. Stannis took the position of Duke of Storm's End and Lord of the Stormlands, but no one supported him. That night, more than half of the nobles in Storm's End left, and took their armies with them, leaving only a few knights who followed Stannis wholeheartedly. Storm's End is not far from King's Landing. A road passes through the royal forest, and leads directly to King's Landing. What happened in Storm's End also spread to King's Landing quickly. Viserys had just presided over a trial, and sentenced a noble who abducted a young girl to death. In the morning, he was beheaded. In the afternoon, the family wanted to defect, but the gold cloaks caught them, and threw them all into prison. At this evening, he was looking through the latest intelligence in the study in the Red Keep. The latest intelligence, provided by Intelligence Minister Varys. At this moment, the eunuch known as the Octopus Spider stood respectfully in front of Viserys. Viserys used to be a little wary of this person, but now he can trust him boldly. Because he had tampered with Varys' memory, although he could not see what had happened, Viserys added loyalty to Varys' memory, and the Octopus Spider could not betray him for at least a period of time. The Dawn army broke through Nightsong and besieged Highgarden. The Tyrells asked the High Towers for help, and the army of the South Lighthouse was on its way to Highgarden. Oberyn's army has reached the Red Lake, and met the Lannister army. A small-scale conflict broke out, and the outcome and details of the battle between the two sides are unknown. The brothers of the Baratheon family in Storm's End fought each other. Stannis killed Renly himself, and named himself the Duke of Storm's End, but he was not recognized by the nobles of the Stormlands. At this time, Viserys saw the next piece of information and a strange expression appeared on his face. Is this news from the Vale? Chapter 491, Valley Storm. This is the information provided by Varys, which records some of the things that happened in the Vale. The Alliance of the Just is the name given to themselves by the nobles who controlled the Eyrie. They held the power of the Vale, and ordered the rest of the nobles to join them. If they refused to join, they would be executed at the least, or their families would be destroyed, and their fiefdoms would be deprived after the city was broken. There was already a noble who publicly accused the Alliance of the Just of entering the Eyrie of being an act of treason. They controlled the Eyrie, and took the young master with them to command the princes. However, it was not long before the noble was breached by the army of the Alliance of the Just, and the whole family was killed. When the order began to collapse, and people's hearts changed, the butcher's knife naturally began to be raised high. The rest of the nobles in the Vale saw the lessons of the past and naturally did not dare to openly sing against the Alliance of the Just, so they could only be forced to join it. And the more nobles the Alliance of the Just took with them, the faster its power expanded, and the more out of control it became. The expansion of power brought unparalleled power, and the taste of power made people unable to stop. They imagined that they had become the actual rulers of the Eyrie. Once people opened their greed, they would never be able to restrain themselves unless they encountered a difficult wall. The first group of nobles in the valley who came to power was headed by early on Royce of Runestone City. There were also the Wayward family, the Hunter family, etc. But when they entered the Eyrie and controlled the owner of the valley, the Arin family, they quickly became corrupt and degenerate. Jan Royce was okay. Although he had a little selfishness and forced his daughter to marry, he still adhered to the overall situation, that is, to unite all the nobles to fight against the young Dragon Lord, while the rest of the nobles in the Justice Alliance had a series of power struggles and infighting. In particular, the jealousy and intrigue mainly revolved around the pretty widow who married into the Arin family and her children. Everyone wanted to possess Lissa and the custody of the young Duke Robert Arin, including Leon Royce, who always upheld justice. Lissa Tully has quite a few suitors in the Vale. When she was young, Lissa was a beautiful slim big-breasted girl, delicate and shy. It was only after she married John Arin, the old man in the Vale, that she gradually gained weight and became haggard after several miscarriages. Moreover, Lissa Tully's in-laws were also very powerful. The Tully family had overcome the difficulties and successfully landed on the side of Viserys. Although the title of Lord of the Riverlands and Duke was stripped, Riverrun was still in the hands of the Tully family, and the Tully family would not decline for a while. And if the Alliance of the Righteous was defeated one day, relying on the relationship of the Tully family, they might be able to kneel to the young Dragon Lord, which was also a two-way bet. Therefore, Lissa Tully is particularly popular now, and even has more suitors than when she was young and beautiful. According to the information collected by Varys' little birds, Lissa Tully's room is not locked at night. Some people witnessed several nobles from the valley entering and leaving the room of the pretty widow late at night, and each time they stayed for a long time, and there were also strange sounds coming from them. This is interesting. Viserys couldn't help but laugh and shook his head when he saw this intelligence, while the octopus spider still crossed his hands on his sleeves, half bowed respectfully, and his posture looked extremely humble. According to the intelligence, the people who had entered and left the bedroom of the Duchess of the Eyrie late at night included Earl John Royce of Runestone City, Petty Baelish Littlefinger, Erlyon Hunter, who was older than Jon Arryn, and his son Jerwood Hunter and his son, and Esther Royce, the steward of the Eyrie, etc. The breeze outside the window was warm, and the sunlight penetrated the white curtains and sprinkled into the bright study in Meagher's tower in the Red Castle. The silver-haired young man was wearing black velvet clothes, leaning on the back of the chair with his legs crossed. Looking at the intelligence in his hand, he smiled mysteriously and then looked thoughtful. Although Petty Baelish was only one of the people who entered and left Lissa Tully's room late at night, based on Viserys' understanding of Littlefinger, this conspiracy master must be behind this matter. Perhaps the chaos in the Justice League today is the work of Petty Baelish. HMPH. Littlefinger. Viserys put down the intelligence in his hand and just snorted coldly, touched the platinum ring on his finger, and closed his eyes slightly. Chaos is not an abyss, but a ladder. The kingdom, the gods, and love are all illusions. Only the ladder is real, and climbing hard does everything. However, when Viserys opened his eyes again, he saw Varys staring at him, as if he had heard something extraordinary from Viserys. Nothing, don't be surprised, Varys. And Viserys naturally didn't need to consider what Varys was thinking at the moment. He just casually said a famous saying of Littlefinger. This is just what a certain sage once said, and I suddenly thought of it. Varys' face suddenly showed a puzzled expression when he heard Viserys' words. He didn't read much and wanted to know which sage would say such a rebellious thing. But he instinctively didn't dare to question Viserys' words, just moved his mind for a while, then bowed slightly and left. Your Majesty. Yes. Viserys nodded, watching Varys retreat to the door, then left and closed the door again. He silently watched the eunuch's back, his expression unchanged. He couldn't modify the memory of a certain person on a large scale. His mental control ability after his mental power reached 30 was only suitable for controlling his mind for a short time, or modifying his memory on a small scale. Varys was one of his test subjects. He originally wanted to see Varys' memory and understand his nature, but he didn't expect the octopus spider to hide himself very deeply. Viserys added a keyword called loyalty to Varys' memory. If this keyword was in a very serious conflict with Varys' nature, perhaps he would be able to detect the abnormality soon. After all, human beings are very wonderful creatures. All of them are delicate instruments. Their minds have a certain self-examination and rejection function. The longer the time, the more rebellious the implanted memory is, and perhaps the earlier it is discovered, the implanted person may not find that someone has modified his memory. After all, this is already a fantasy skill, but he may subtly modify his own views, thinking that he has a view that is not in line with his nature at some point in time. Chapter 492 Notice. For example, if you see a beautiful woman on the side of the road, you might think, how can I have such an evil thought? The person being cast may just think that he has a special idea for a moment, because the human brain produces too many consciousnesses every day, and it is impossible to imagine that his mind is actually controlled by someone. As for Petty Beelish, Littlefinger's investment vision is actually more unique, and he also has a sense of the overall situation. He has been on Viserys' side for a long time. Littlefinger was once commissioned by the Prime Minister Jon Arryn to represent the Iron Throne, to go to Pentos to ask Viserys for help, asking the young dragon to ride a dragon to Westeros to help all mankind resist the invasion of the White Walkers. During that mission, Petty Beelish had 3 missions at the same time. The first was the core purpose of the mission, to get help. The second was commissioned by Queen Cersei, hoping to get in touch with Viserys, to mediate the hatred between the Targaryen family and the Lannister family. She was even willing to marry Viserys. As for the third thing, it was Littlefinger's own business. He established a relationship with Viserys through this mission. When he met Viserys late at night, to complete the task assigned by Cersei, he knelt on the ground and said that the Beelish family should submit to the real master of the Iron Throne. Lysa Tully, the Duchess of the Eyrie, was his mistress. He was willing to be an insider, to help Viserys remove obstacles, and obtain the veil in the future. Later, the assassination of Robert's Prime Minister Jon Arryn was also related to Littlefinger Petty Beelish, and his shadow was also behind it. He is best at provoking people's hearts, and people's hearts are the most changeable things. On the other hand, the only important minister in Robert's royal meeting who was retained in the new dynasty, 8-clawed spider Varys, walked out of Viserys' room. When he closed the door, the humble attitude on his face disappeared instantly. Chaos is not an abyss, but a ladder. The bold eunuch crossed his hands in his sleeves and slowly walked down the stairs towards the outside of Meagher's tower. As he walked, his eyebrowless brows were slightly frowned, and he pondered this sentence carefully. Sage. Which sage would say such a treasonous word? Moreover, such a famous saying should have been regarded as a classic by countless conspirators, but it has never been mentioned. Could it be that this sentence came from the mouth of His Majesty? Varys was shocked by his own thoughts, but then he remembered that Viserys was not a good person either. A boy who was only 8 years old when he fled to the East Continent could stir up such a big storm, regain his country and sit back on the Iron Throne. How could he be a great good man? However, at this stage, His Majesty is indeed a wise ruler. He intends to break the wheel of aristocratic autocracy and give hope to many poor people. The bold eunuch walked out of Meagher's tower unknowingly and came to the royal garden in the Red Castle. While he was thinking about it, he bumped into the Lord Admiral Geoffrey Bracken, who was wearing the Bracken family medal on his chest. The old earl returned to the Seven Kingdoms with dignity and regained his previous identity at the strong request of Viserys. He is the eldest son of the Bracken family in Stonehenge, and his younger brother Janis was executed in Riverrun, and he naturally became the new Earl of Stonehenge, and the governor of the Three Rivers in the future is almost certain. As for the illegitimate son, left by his younger brother Janis, he naturally dared not touch the new Lord Admiral of the new dynasty, who was regarded as the adoptive father by His Majesty the King. The sun was shining brightly in the royal garden, the flowers were in full bloom, and the breeze was gentle. The old earl was still wearing a military uniform, leather armor inlaid with rivets. He had been used to this kind of attire after a lifetime of military service, and could not wear those gorgeous robes. Lord Varys. The old man's grey hair fluttered in the wind, and the bald spot in the middle reflected the sunlight. He saw his colleague who was worried from a distance, and then took the initiative to greet him enthusiastically. Varys, who was thinking about something, was suddenly startled by the loud voice, but then he came to his senses and saw that it was the old Earl Geoffrey Bracken, the commander-in-chief of the Dragonstone fleet and the Minister of the Navy, and a slight bitter smile appeared on his face. The old man was not young, but his spirit was still very strong and his voice was very loud. It is said that Stannis shot him with an arrow when he recaptured Dragonstone a few years ago, which almost took his life, but he survived unexpectedly and seemed to be still alive and kicking. Good day, Lord Geoffrey. The bald eunuch smiled bitterly when he saw the old earl, then bowed and greeted him. Lord Varys, is there something on your mind? Varys wanted to say hello and leave in a hurry, but he didn't expect that Lord Geoffrey Bracken, who had become nosy in his old age, would stop and talk to him. It's just a trivial matter. Geoffrey stopped and chatted with him, and Varys had no choice but to stop and explain, and then took the initiative to change the subject. Lord Geoffrey is going to see His Majesty? Yes, that's right. The grey-haired old earl nodded and admitted generously. It's about naval supplies. I want to ask the Minister of Finance Illyrio for money, but he is not here, so I can only come to His Majesty. However, when he said this, Geoffrey suddenly remembered that Illyrio seemed to have mentioned before that he had a good friend in Westeros, Varys. Thinking of this, Lord Geoffrey felt that the bald eunuch in front of him was more friendly, rather than the only important minister left from the previous dynasty, sitting alone in a corner of the royal meeting. From now on, we will serve as ministers in the same palace. I hope Lord Varys will bear more. We are loyal and work together to help Viserys and help His Majesty the King to unify the Seven Kingdoms as soon as possible. Lord Geoffrey actually always treated Viserys as his own son. He watched Viserys grow up. Now that he has regained the Iron Throne, he naturally wants to help Viserys manage the country well, so as not to repeat the mistakes of the Mad King. The old earl shook Varys' hand enthusiastically, and the bald eunuch felt that the fake smile on his face was about to break. It was not until Geoffrey left that Varys breathed a sigh of relief. This old man, he was born in the Free Trade City and lived and worked in King's Landing for many years. He was used to lies and conspiracies. Suddenly he met such a warm and hospitable person and was a little overwhelmed. But Varys suddenly thought of a word that Lord Geoffrey had just said, and it felt a little awkward. Loyalty? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 493, A Race Against Time. Dawn, the South, the Stormlands, the Vale, and King's Landing are all in a state of flux, in a situation that has not happened in 1,000 or even 10,000 years. On the battlefield in the west, after leaving King's Landing, a baron personally led an army of 20,000 men along the Golden Road and rushed straight to caverns, seemingly intending to break through the gates of the west. Upon receiving the news, Tywin Lannister, the Duke of Casterly Rock, immediately prepared for battle, as if facing a formidable enemy, and issued a series of orders to deploy troops and generals, and even personally went to the battlefield to prepare to snipe the Dornish prince in caverns. However, the shrewd Tywin did not expect that he would be tricked by a young junior, because the Targaryen army attacked along the Golden Road, so Tywin did not ask for help from the Reach. In fact, the Reach was also busy now. The Dorne army had broken through the borderlands and surrounded Highgarden. The Hightower family was on their way to rescue them. The Tyrell family had not yet finished their own affairs, so they naturally had no time to take care of the Westerlands. They did not know the news, but at this time, the army led by a baron was about to reach Deep Cave City, but suddenly turned around, accelerated, and broke through directly in the direction of Silver Mountain. A baron's army easily broke through the small castle of the Saliad family, and corpses were everywhere, and the smoke was filled. Silver Mountain City is also called Silver Hall. It is located in the mountainous area on the edge of the Westerlands, and is rich in silver mines, so it has such a name. Although they were prepared in advance, the Saliad family, whose family motto is unrivaled, still could not withstand a baron's attack. They were even captured before they had time to surrender. After conquering Silver Mountain, a Baron began to kill people and vent his emotions. The wealth accumulated by the Saliot family was also plundered. Kill. With a Baron's order, all members of the Saliot family, except for babies, were executed, and their heads rolled to the ground. This battle made a Baron wait for 10 years, and the blood made him sober for a short time. From childhood to adulthood, a Baron had a very close relationship with his sister Elia. The two siblings were inseparable. They had the most sincere family affection, not the deformed relationship between Cersei and Jaime. Because of this, after Elia was brutally killed by the Lannister family, a Baron almost went crazy. He vowed to pay blood debts and avenge his sister. In this battle, a Baron wanted to make the entire Westland stained with blood. His voice was deafening, causing countless Targaryen soldiers to cheer. Tell Tywin with their blood. It's not just the Lannisters who have to pay their debts. I will dye this land red with their blood. Take away their gold. Burn down their castles. That evening, rumble, the banners of the sun-piercing golden spear and the three-headed dragon were flying, and the sound of galloping horses was even louder. The army marched with dust covering the sky and sun, and rushed to the west like a rolling torrent under the setting sun. The second Targaryen legion broke through Silver Mountain, after arguing with Tywin Lannister, but they did not stay in Silver Mountain for long, and continued to set off. This is a game of racing against time. A Baron's command style is flexible, agile and cunning. Since he has successfully fooled Tywin, the wily commander-in-chief of the Lannister family, he must seize the opportunity next. A Baron must conquer this place first and open the road to Lannisport before Tywin reacts and leads the Westerly army to occupy Crake Hall, otherwise all his previous efforts will be in vain. Therefore, after he led the Targaryen army to conquer Silver Mountain, he slaughtered the city without leaving any harm behind. He sped up his speed, lightly armed and simply dressed, and rushed straight to the next prey, Corn City. Corn City, like Silver Mountain City, is also located in the outer area of the Westerly Mountains. It is the castle of the Swift family, a wealthy family of knights loyal to Casterly Rock. Their family emblem is a blue bantam chicken with a yellow background, and their family motto is Awaken. Awaken. Because Corn City is not large in scale, even smaller than Silver Mountain City, a Baron did not lead the army to attack it personally, but sent the Rhoynar 11th to lead a detachment to capture Corn City. A Baron himself led a large army south to Red Lake, preparing to bypass this vast forest and rush straight to Crake Hall from the coast road. According to legend, this vast forest next to the Sunset Sea was once the area where the children of the forest lived. The ancestors once fought a protracted war with the children of the forest here. After the Oath of the Thousand Faces Isle, the children of the forest occupied the forest, and the ancestors occupied the coast, plains, grasslands, mountains, and swamps, ending the Dawn Age, and starting the Heroic Age. According to the original plan of the Imperial Council, if a Baron led the army to conquer Crake Hall, he could directly attack Lannisport, the largest city in the west, and Casterly Rock, the capital of the west, along the coastal road, perfectly bypassing the complex terrain and natural dangers of the west. This is the best offensive route to advance into the west. If he fights against Deep Hole City, Golden Tooth City and other places, it is likely that, even if all of a Baron's 20,000 people die, it will be difficult to defeat them. However, what a Baron knew was naturally noticed by the old commander of the Seven Kingdoms, Lord Tywin Lannister, who was famous for his steady use of troops. After receiving the news that Silver Mountain City was breached, he instantly realized that he was fooled by a Baron. The other party's real intention was to break through Crake Hall. Damn Dornish barbarians. Come here. Duke Tywin looked at the belated intelligence in the tent, and couldn't help but raise his hand to grab a candlestick and smash it on the ground, then ordered a retreat with a sullen face. He woke everyone up in the middle of the night and set off to the west at night. The masters can understand each other's intentions in every move. The current situation has become a game of racing against time. However, Duke Tywin was careful this time. He left a lot of soldiers before leaving Deep Cave City. Anyway, fighting on the West Territory has a great advantage in the number of soldiers, which is to fight with more people against fewer people, to prevent a Baron from making another comeback. However, although the straight line distance from Deep Cave City to Crake Hall is shorter, the mountains in the West Territory are surrounded by complicated roads, and it is actually more difficult to walk than outside. Hurry up, everyone. Speed up. Duke Tywin personally went to the battlefield to supervise the troops. He told all the vassals and nobles that those who fell behind would die. When the supervisory team came on the scene, they killed dozens of people in a row, and the advance speed of the entire team instantly increased. Chapter 494, Two Armies Confronted. However, Duke Tywin's worry about Deep Cavern was unnecessary. This kind of mountainous terrain is indeed not suitable for the Targaryen 2nd Legion, which is more powerful in cavalry warfare. The 2nd Legion trained by a baron is mainly composed of cavalry, and each soldier is skilled in archery and horse riding. This is actually a very obvious style of the Dawn Army. The excellent desert horse breed produced in Dawn has an advantage in the cavalry contest, and the 2nd Legion is mainly composed of Rhoynar people, so it can come and go like the wind. In a place like Deep Cavern, attacking the castle on the mountain from above, even a small number of troops stationed can stop the attack of the army. Although a baron has set up a false army to confuse Tywin, he will not really use it as a breakthrough point. In that case, even if he takes it down, the price he pays is too high, unless his brain is broken. In fact, the smarter the brain, the more he pursues excellence and perfection. Otherwise, it is too unchallenging for such a smart person, and cannot satisfy the secretion of dopamine. A baron not only pursues victory, but also pursues the lowest cost, and the most brilliant victory. Hurry. Everyone, run faster. A few days later, this race against time finally had a preliminary result. The Targaryen army marched faster, and rushed to the Red Lake in the blink of an eye, while the Lannister army was not slow to react. Duke Tywin quickly dispatched troops to return, and sent a message by Raven, ordering his cousin Stafford Lannister, who stayed in Casterly Rock, to lead the rest of the army, and even the garrison of Lannisport, to rush to Crake Hall for support. A baron was one step faster than Tywin, but not as fast as Stafford, who was already on the same road. So the two armies faced off on the Red Lake, and a small-scale conflict broke out. Kill. The horns sounded melodiously, the horses roared, and the generals of the Targaryen army took the lead in the swords and shadows. Barbarians from Dawn. Die. At this time, a tall and strong man with a full beard waved a hammer, and killed a baron in the crowd. Stafford Lannister naturally brought not only the Lannister family soldiers this time, but also many troops left behind by the westerly nobles. Anyway, the Iron Islands have become a ghost town, and there is no need to keep guards in Lannisport, and they don't need them. The second son of the Earl of Crake Hall, Selel Crake Hall, nicknamed Strongboar, rushed towards the baron. He was tall and strong, and his nickname alone could tell that he was brave and unparalleled. This is also the motto of the Crake Hall family of Crake Hall, brave and unparalleled. The family emblem is a wild boar with a brown background and black and white stripes. Although he lost to Jorah Mormont of Bear Island in the Lannisport tournament, where Greyjoy's rebellion was suppressed, Lel did not think it was his fault, but that the sun was too dazzling that day, so he could not see clearly when charging. A baron also saw the other party, but his face showed no fear. He licked his blood-stained lips slightly, feeling the pungent smell of blood between his lips and teeth. HMPH. Then the red VIP smiled coldly, and rushed towards Lyle as well. Kill. Then Lyle roared, and the weapons of the two men collided heavily. Bang. A baron felt that his palms were slightly numb, and he was almost thrown off the horse's back, but a baron's riding skills were also very superb. He clamped his legs tightly around the horse's belly, and the warhorse ran forward, then turned its head again. What a great strength. Sir Strong Pig deserves such a nickname. A baron recognized the other party, shook his numb arms, and teased with a playful smile on his face. When a baron and his sister Elia were young, they followed their mother to the north to the west to propose marriage. They stayed in the Crake Hall for a short time, but when they recalled the past memories, they naturally thought of their innocent sister at that time. The smile on the face of Prince Dawn slowly disappeared, and Ser Strongboar naturally did not want to reminisce with a baron. When a baron and his sister were guests at Crake Hall, he even wanted to propose to Elia, but because of his size, he was ridiculed by a baron, which made Lel depressed for a long time. Stop talking nonsense. Lel Hall once again waved his hammer and rushed towards Oberyn, and this time the smile on Oberyn's face disappeared, leaving only coldness. Then, when the two horses crossed, Oberyn showed no mercy. His spear was like a poisonous snake spitting out its tongue, easily piercing Lel Hall's throat, and then he lifted his body high in the air in his wide eyes, and threw it to the ground, splashing dust. Prince Dorn easily killed Ser Strongbor, the bravest general of the Westerland army on the battlefield, and this move hit the morale of the Westerland army. Finally, the Westerland army left a pile of corpses and retreated to the camp. Both sides stopped fighting temporarily, and the Targaryen army also chose a flat area by the Red Lake to set up camp. Captain. In the Targaryen camp, Oberyn took off his blood-stained armor with the help of his servants, and a soldier hurried to report. Corn City has been captured by Lord Evan Person. Lord Evan asked you how to deal with the Swiftford family. Kill. Oberyn walked towards the big tent and said lightly, yes. The messenger immediately retreated and conveyed the order, and then another officer ran over to report. Captain. The reconnaissance unit captured several prisoners in the battle with the enemy. Perhaps they can be interrogated. Oberyn ignored him and opened the tent. The officers sitting inside stood up and spoke in unison. Captain. Then, after Oberyn sat on the chair and touched his chin, he spoke. You can interrogate them first and tell me the results. Yes, sir. Then the officer of the reconnaissance unit also retreated. At this time, the officer in charge of the logistics unit in the tent stood up and reported. Sir, logistics here. The Targaryen army has strict military discipline and clear regulations. Problems will be reported to Oberyn only after they are summarized. Everything is handled in an orderly manner, and the efficiency is much higher than that of the other armies of the Seven Kingdoms. On the other side, the Westerly army retreated to the camp after the battle. As the commander of the entire army, Stafford Lannister also had a group of staff and nobles. A large group of people sat together, with noisy and chaotic voices, reading a letter sent by his cousin, Duke Tywin. In the letter, Duke Tywin asked his cousin to lead the army. The first priority is to defend Hall, and the second is to fight with the Targaryen army. If you can avoid fighting, try to shrink and avoid fighting, and wait for him to arrive. Although the letter did not state it explicitly, it almost showed the distrust of Stafford's ability. There was some confusion in the central army tent, and the nobles sat together. The chubby Lannister commander suddenly looked a little embarrassed. Lord Tywin asked us to retreat. My lords, what should we do? Then he looked around, asking for the opinions of other nobles and knights. Chapter 495, Retreat. Lord Stafford. At this time, a middle-aged man with a sad face and slightly grey hair spoke in the big tent. My son died at the hands of the Dornish barbarians. You saw it. Everyone saw it. He was Earl Roland Hall of Hall. His second son, Lel, had just died at the hands of Oberyn in a brief conflict. Earl Roland Hall's words made the big tent silent. All the nobles and knights looked at each other, then lowered their heads and remained silent. After all, the other party's son had just died, and any words at this time would likely cause hatred. Lord Roland. The plump Commander Stafford Lannister looked embarrassed, hesitated for a moment, and then spoke. Although he had led troops to fight alone several times, and had certain command abilities, he only fought against inferior bandits and had also resisted the invasion of the Ironborn. But Stafford also had a very obvious shortcoming, that is, he never had any ideas. In fact, if Tywin really didn't have anyone trustworthy and available, he wouldn't have used him. If it weren't for Kevin and Gillian, Tywin would have hated Viserys every time he thought of this. Stafford's sister is Tywin's wife Jonah, and Stafford and Jonah's common cousin is Tywin. It is precisely because of this complex and blood-related relationship that Tywin values Stafford so much. Lord Stafford. However, Stafford Lannister was embarrassed and was about to say something, but was interrupted by Earl Roland. The grey-haired middle-aged man stood up, looked at the other party sincerely and earnestly, and then looked around at everyone around him. The barbarians of Dorne only brought 20,000 people, and our number is not less than this. And I'm more familiar with the terrain here than anyone else. I have a good suggestion. The Targaryen army and the Lannister army confronted each other. However, in the early morning of the next day, the soldiers responsible for reconnaissance hurried to report. "My lord, the Legion commander." A baron was washing up at this moment. His upper body was naked, revealing his dark brown skin and strong muscles, and his lower body was wearing a pair of sandy yellow breeches. He stood in front of a golden basin, rinsed his mouth, and then spit out the water in his mouth. "My lord prince." The maid who was wearing revealing clothes took a towel to help him wipe the water drops on his face, and then her jade hand gently stroked a baron's chest, and her beautiful eyes showed a charming smile. "Tonight." However, the maid who was wearing revealing clothes only said half of the words, and then she glanced at the guards who broke in, and then smiled again, picked up the golden basin, turned around and swayed away. A baron was the only one in the Targaryen army who could bring female relatives, whether it was a mistress, a maid, or even a guard with a fair face. This was also the privilege of the Dornish prince who had worked diligently for many years. However, although a baron was obsessed with carnal desires and love, and believed that this was the best gift given to mankind by the gods, he was a smart man, and smart people would not let hobbies affect their business. The maid knew a baron's temper, so when she saw a guard coming in to report something, she immediately took the basin and turned away. A baron also had a smile on his face. He liked the girl's understanding. Snap. Then he reached out and patted the maid's perky buttocks, which were full of elasticity, and made a crisp sound, in exchange for a coquettish and blaming eye roll. Then, watching the half-covered maid holding the basin and leaving, a baron slowly withdrew his gaze with a sense of satisfaction. Looking at the guard who broke in, he raised his chin slightly and spoke. "Tell me, what's wrong?" According to the rules of a baron's army, if there is nothing important, no one will come to disturb him at this time in the morning. But since the guard came, it means that something big has happened. "Captain, the Lannister family's army has retreated." Then the guard hurriedly spoke. "Oh." When a baron heard the guard's words, the smile on his face slowly disappeared a lot, and his pair of dark eyes flashed with light. But he didn't seem surprised by this. A baron had thought long ago that the other party might not fight him but retreat directly. Then he nodded. "That's all?" "Yes, sir." The guard nodded. "Retreat." However, when the guard turned around and left the tent, the smile on a baron's face disappeared completely, and his face became serious. He knew that the opponent he was facing now was not the Duke Tywin. A baron was confident that no matter how fast Tywin rode, he could not move as fast as his soldiers, not to mention in the complex terrain of the mountains. However, the Westerlands was a big country after all. Although the Westerlands was not the largest, most populous or most abundant region in the Seven Kingdoms, there was no doubt that the Westerlands was the richest. The Westerlands were mountainous, and the output of gold and silver mines was astonishing. It was even said that the shit that the Duke Tywin took was gold. The Westerlands were so rich that they could naturally hire a large number of troops and weapons and equipment. A baron only brought more than 20,000 people to conquer the Westerly, which was indeed a bit stretched. However, he actually had an advance estimate of the dilemma he was facing. He knew that this action would not be easy, but a baron was an optimistic person. He never showed pessimism on his face. Instead, he always looked unhurried and confident of victory, which made the officers and soldiers below full of confidence. The result he most expected was that the Lannister army in front of him could fight him openly. In this way, he would at least have a chance to eat them and severely damage the living force of the Westerly. And what a baron feared most was actually the original deployment of Duke Tywin, who ordered all the Westerly troops to retreat to the castle, shrink and defend, not counterattack or resist, and wait for reinforcement to converge. In that case, a baron's chances of winning and taking over the Westerly would be greatly reduced. As a commander with rich qualifications and experience, Duke Tywin naturally understood where a baron's weaknesses were. He didn't need to compete with young people like a baron to see who had a smarter brain. He just needed to do his job step by step, be flawless, and wait for a baron's weakness to be exposed. Fuck him. A baron clenched his teeth and cursed loudly, then put on a sandy yellow coat, opened the tent and walked out. Someone come. Chase. Chapter 496. Counterattack. After waking up from their sleep during the day, the Lannister army slowly dismantled the camp and began to retreat slowly. The Targaryen army seemed to suspect that the other side was cheating and was not in a hurry to chase. Instead, they quietly watched from behind for a while. When they found that the other side was indeed going to retreat, they hurriedly chased after them to prevent them from really escaping. However, Oberyn's pursuit fell into the other side's trap. The edge of the Red Lake was surrounded by a vast forest. This was the place where the children of the forest and humans had fought. Now, kill these invaders. The Targaryen army mistakenly entered the encirclement of the Lannister family during the pursuit. The Lannister army suddenly turned around, and there were shouts of killing in all directions. Then the two sides experienced a fierce fight in the forest. The Targaryen army was beaten and fled all the way to the edge of the Red Lake. Escape. Escape. They even lost their own camp, and the Lannister army burned down the camp. They became stray dogs and fled far away in one breath. After chasing for a while, the Lannister army retreated because they could not catch up. The Lannister army won the first victory since the Battle of the Twins. The great Sir Stafford Lannister made a decision and led the soldiers of the Westerlands to defeat the famous Prince of Dawn. After a day of fierce fighting, the Targaryen army had fled without a trace, and night gradually fell. In the Lannister camp. Come. Let's raise our glasses together. Congratulations to General Stafford Lannister. A knight with the coat of arms of the Payne family on his chest stood up first, raised his glass, and called on everyone to toast Stafford. For Lord Stafford. The atmosphere at the dinner was warm, and the other knights and nobles in the Westerlands raised their glasses. Only one knight with half of his face covered with burn marks seemed to have a strange temper. He disdained the dinner. Although he also raised his glass, he drank it all by himself. The Lannister army repelled the Targaryen army, and the enemy fled in panic. Naturally, they returned to the camp that had been abandoned. Now the Lannister camp was full of sounds of celebration, and even opened fine wine and set up a banquet to celebrate the victory of this war. Except for Sandor Gregor, the Hound, the rest of the nobles and knights in the army sat together and raised their glasses high to toast Sir Stafford Lannister, who led everyone to victory. The fat Sir Stafford had a ruddy face and blurred eyes at this moment, and it was obvious that he was a little proud. Calm down. Stafford, calm down. Although he had been telling himself in his heart that he should be calm at this time. After all, the war was not over yet, and Oberyn was not an easy person to deal with, so he still needed to be careful next. But this hearty and real victory, as well as the dense flattery like raindrops after the war, still made him a little unable to control himself. He defeated the famous Oberyn, and the Targaryen army was not as invincible as it seemed. And it seems that after this battle, Stafford has leaped to the ranks of outstanding commanders such as his cousin Tywin Lannister, Randyll Tarly, King Robert, etc. Hahaha, everyone, thank you for your praise. A little bit of victory is not worth mentioning. Stafford was wearing the black and gold armor of the Lannister family. He untied some of the belts on the armor to reveal the lining inside. His long sword was placed on the edge of the chair beside him. He was full of alcohol. He stood up with a glass of wine in his hand and drank it all in one gulp, which once again brought cheers from the audience. Humph. Only Sandor Greg took a leg of lamb in his hand and bit off a piece of meat fiercely. He snorted disdainfully, but he didn't make much noise. He just chewed with the strong wine in the glass. According to Stafford's judgment, the Targaryen army should not make a comeback in a short time after this setback. After all, their tents have been burned down. In fact, this is what makes the Lannister army commander most relieved, so he promised his nobles and knights to celebrate tonight. Because according to the conventions of the two armies fighting, and the most basic common sense of commanding soldiers, no matter where the war goes, they must first set up camps. The barracks are the foundation of an army. How can you march and fight without a home? Otherwise, there is no place to store supplies, and the soldiers cannot rest in peace. Can't bury the pot and cook, and morale will inevitably collapse. The Targaryen army has no castles or towns nearby, and the camp was burned down by the Lannister army when it collapsed thousands of miles, including a large amount of supplies in the barracks. Therefore, for the Targaryen army, there are only two choices tonight: either retreat to a far place and seize the time to build a new camp, or simply withdraw the army and wait for the subsequent supplies transported from King's Landing and the Riverlands to arrive before attacking the west again. But at that time, it might not be just these armies. Perhaps a baron would choose to go to King's Landing to mobilize people, or even ask the newly crowned viziers to send out the legendary dragon to help. Stafford had seen the dragon, which left a deep impression on him. But cousin Tywin encouraged them and told everyone that the Westerlands were mountainous and it was impossible to conquer the Westerlands just by relying on dragons flying in the sky, just like the conquerors who hit a wall everywhere when they attacked Dawn. As long as they can guard all the passages into the Westerlands in the future. Stafford was drunk, his brain was dizzy, and he even fell asleep on the table. Except for a few people like Sander, most of the nobles at the banquet were drunk. At this time, outside the Lannister camp, the horses' hooves were wrapped in cloth strips, and all the soldiers held branches in their mouths to prevent any noise. The Targaryen army sneaked back to the outside of the Lannister camp without anyone noticing. "My lord?" A guard turned his head and looked at a baron. The Prince of Dawn, who had retreated during the day, was now wearing armor and looked energetic. He looked coldly at the brightly lit military camp in front of him, especially the golden lion flag hanging high, and clenched his fists tightly. He had only more than 20,000 people. Facing the Westerly army with more soldiers and better weapons and equipment, he could not afford to make the slightest mistake. However, it was such a difficult challenge that made a baron excited. Kill them all. Then, accompanied by an order, the sound of a horn suddenly sounded. Kill. The roar sounded like thunder outside the Lannister camp, and countless Targaryen troops rushed in from all directions like a torrent. Chapter 497 Attack on the Camp. Kill. The sudden shouts of killing from all directions startled the nobles and knights of the West who were celebrating and drinking. Huh? What happened? In fact, Stafford was not completely a lazy person. Before the banquet, he had ordered the soldiers to step up patrols and strictly guard, and not to relax. But the commanders relaxed their vigilance during the banquet, which set a bad example. How could the soldiers be expected to execute orders conscientiously? Moreover, the victory during the day was obvious to all. The Targaryen army was beaten by them and fled in panic, which naturally gave rise to the heart of underestimating the enemy. This batch of Lannister soldiers were actually new troops in the garrison of Lannisport. They had never left their hometown, had never seen the White Walkers and the army of the dead, nor had they encountered the iron hoofs of dragons and Dothraki. At the beginning, they were still afraid of the famous Targaryen army. But after this battle, all Lannister soldiers relaxed a lot, from the commander-in-chief and each commander to every ordinary soldier below. The tense atmosphere of the entire army from top to bottom disappeared, and even became relaxed and active. And a baron seized this opportunity, using a false defeat, to let the enemy relax their vigilance, thinking that the Targaryen army was not so invincible. At least a victory would prevent Stafford Lannister from turning around and running away. Now a baron has also learned who his opponent is through the captured prisoners. The eldest brother-in-law of Duke Tywin, Sir Stafford Lannister. Who is this Sir Stafford Lannister? And a baron was still a little confused when he heard this name at first. Then he heard the confession of the prisoners and learned that this person turned out to be Tywin's eldest brother-in-law. It is said that the opponent's most outstanding record was commanding 1,000 Lannister soldiers to clear the Iron People who came to the coast of the West to harass, and then to wipe out a certain warrior group, a certain bandit and a vagrant. However, real war is not the same as clearing out some scumbag bandits. A person who can make 5 or 6 people willingly obey orders can be regarded as a grassroots commander, and then command dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of people. The more people there are, the higher the requirements for the commander. When a person can command an army of tens of thousands of people without chaos, he can be regarded as a qualified commander. Stafford had commanded at most 1 or 2,000 people, but commanding 20,000 and 2,000 people are two completely different things. As a commander, in terms of personal ability and charm, a baron's attack on Stafford was already a dimensionality reduction attack. He naturally would not miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. After hearing Stafford's name, a baron made up his mind to eat up more than 20,000 Lannister troops in one bite. Rumble. The sound of galloping horses was rampant, and there were shouts of killing everywhere. Countless Targaryen troops rushed into the Lannister camp. Countless soldiers from the west had just woken up from their sleep. They had not even had time to put on their armor and pick up their swords, but were cut in the throat by the cavalrymen, who came roaring in. Blood spurted out, and their bodies fell to the ground. Tents were overturned, and bright scimitars and long swords were raised high, and then fell heavily. Kill. Kill all these bastards. Kill Stafford Lannister. The shouts of killing from all directions were like a basin of ice water poured on their heads, instantly sobering up all the drunken nobles and knights from the west. They looked at the messy scene in front of them, the fallen wine bottles, and the drunken commander. They only felt cold hands and feet, and their brains were blank. Oh no. The Targaryen army is back. Sandor Clegane, the hound sitting at the table, heard the shouts of killing from all directions and instantly sobered up. Although he drank a lot of wine, he never got drunk, so he reacted faster than other nobles. Sandor stood up and overturned the table in front of him. Crash! The remaining wine and food on the banquet scattered all over the floor, sobering up all the nobles in the west, who were still drunk, including the drunken General Stafford Lannister. Damn it. We were ambushed by the Targaryen army. Is this what you call a great victory? Although Sandor drank a lot of wine, his ugly face was very sober. He was irritable and unscrupulous, and then he cursed and mocked. What the hell is the great General Stafford Lannister? Hahaha, I almost vomited after listening to it just now. Listening to these nobles' unconditional flattery of Stafford at the banquet made Sandor want to vomit. Just a small victory, but he actually praised a good for nothing as being on par with King Robert and Lord Tywin. Then Sandor reached out and pulled out the heavy sword from his waist and chopped down a panicked Lannister soldier. Quick, retreat. The nobles and knights of the Westerlands naturally had no time to care about Sandor's cursing. They were in a panic and didn't know what to do. They could only support the commander who had just woken up and didn't know what happened and hurriedly fled out of the camp under the protection of the guards. Give an order. Everyone, retreat. Stafford also woke up at this time. After learning what happened, he shuddered and his face turned pale. He knew that he had made trouble. But after all, as the commander of the entire army, Stafford knew more about marching and fighting than the Hound Knight who had just scolded him. Stafford knew that, although he had made trouble, it was not the worst situation at the moment. A raid on the camp would not wipe out the entire army, and there was still room for recovery. He had to try his best to reduce the losses at this time, lead the army to stabilize the morale, and then retreat to Crake Hall to defend. Otherwise, if Crake Hall was lost, and the flat road leading to Lannisport was given up, even if he had 3 heads, it would not be enough for Lord Tywin to chop. So Stafford hurriedly gave orders to stabilize the morale of the army. The Lannister army suffered a heavy defeat, left a pile of corpses on the ground, and began to retreat towards Crake Hall. The Targaryen army gave up the pursuit after a while, gathered the army and retreated. The retreat of the Targaryen army made Stafford, who suffered heavy losses, breathe a sigh of relief, but at the same time, an inexplicable ominous premonition suddenly rose in his heart. Why don't they chase us? He looked at the dense forest around him and asked. However, at this moment, in the inconspicuous places around him, sparks began to burn. Chapter 498, Fire Alliance. In this ancient and mysterious forest, a Baron unleashed a fire that was big enough for the entire Westerlands to see. The raging flames shot up into the sky, mixed with green flames. Before leaving King's Landing, a Baron had borrowed several things from Viserys. With the help of these things, he was confident that he could conquer the entire Westerlands. One was the fleet of the Iron Islands, led by Euron Greyjoy, who had surrendered to Viserys. Now that the Iron Islands have fallen, the Iron Fleet brought by Euron is the last Iron race. Viserys allowed Euron to return to the Iron Islands after this battle and rebuild his home. The second was the wildfire hidden under King's Landing. When the Golden Company just arrived in King's Landing, they found a large number of wildfires in many cellars. It is said that they were left by Viserys' father, the Mad King Aerys II. Although these wildfires were moved outside the city, they were of no use outside King's Landing. Instead, they were very dangerous, so a Baron took a lot of them and used them in this battle. Wildfires are very active and are first-class combustibles. Targaryen soldiers only need to throw cans of wildfire on the ground and break them after the Westerland army flees into the woods in panic. Moreover, a can of wildfire will soon burn with the rest of the wildfires, and this ancient and vast forest is an excellent combustion aid. In an instant, a worldwide fire that can be seen by the entire Westerland is formed. Billowing smoke rushed straight into the sky, and the flames illuminated the sky above, as bright as day. The shrill screams of the Westerland soldiers made people's backs cold, like the sound of high temperature frying food, and even exuded the aroma of fat. A Baron was wearing a sandy yellow battle robe with a dazzling golden spear emblem on his chest. He rode his horse and stood on a small hill not far away. His weather-beaten cheeks were illuminated by the fire, and his pair of dark and deep eyes quietly overlooked the fire. Prince. The guards standing beside him couldn't even bear to watch, especially the terrible scene of people being buried in the sea of fire. However, only a Baron remained heartless. This fire burned half of the manpower of the Westerland's army. He suddenly spoke, while sitting on horseback. More than 20,000 young lives, more than 20,000 fathers, sons, and brothers of families. How will the people of the Westerlands view me? Or, how will they view our Lord Tywin? A Baron talked to himself, as if asking the guards around him, and then an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. Let's go. Then he turned his horse's head, and walked down the hill with his guards. He didn't want to continue watching. Get out of here. Not far away, a tall Westerland knight escaped from the sea of fire. He panicked and killed several Lannister soldiers along the way, just because they blocked his way. However, after he escaped from the sea of fire, the Targaryen soldiers were waiting for him. The Mad Knight was like a mad dog. 4 or 5 people could not do anything about it, but they were outnumbered and captured alive and tied up. But this was just a small episode in this war. The attack on the camp by the Targaryen army took place in the middle of the night, and the fire burned until the third night before it slowly came to an end in a heavy rain. The fire devoured this ancient forest that recorded the battle between the ancestors and the children of the forest, and also devoured the lives of more than 10,000 soldiers from the west. Most of the soldiers and nobles from the west were buried in the sea of fire, and some were captured by the Targaryen army, such as Sandor Clegane, and only a few soldiers and nobles escaped. They fled to Crake Hall in one breath, but a Baron led the army to follow. Roland Crake Hall, the Earl of Crake Hall, and his eldest son were buried in the sea of fire. The remaining defeated soldiers of the Westerlands who had just escaped from the sea of fire were in a panic and naturally unable to resist the siege of the Targaryen army. August 293 Egan calendar. A world-renowned fire accompanied the fall of Crake Hall. The Targaryen army finally won the race against time and occupied the place first. A soldier under a Baron's command climbed to the top of the city first and was knighted, while the late Lord Tywin could only sigh at the city after arriving at the foot of the city. At the same time, he had received the news that more than 20,000 Westerland's troops were annihilated. The Red Viper was clever and cunning. He pretended to be defeated to lure the Lannister army back, and then, like the best hunter, he waited for an opportunity and seized the opportunity to eat up this army in one bite. It is said that Lord Tywin almost vomited blood on the spot when he heard the news. His cousin and brother-in-law, Sir Stafford Lannister, a rising star in Westeros, was lucky enough to escape the fire under the desperate protection of his guards. Whether it was luck or the Targaryen army's intentional release. Cousin, spare my life. Now Stafford knelt down in front of his cousin Tywin and kowtowed for mercy, but he could not move the furious Lord Tywin. Tywin's face was as gloomy as water, and he looked at the relative in front of him coldly. Even for the sake of his deceased wife, Tywin could not forgive Stafford, because among these soldiers and nobles who died in the sea of fire, many were relatives of the nobles in the west. I will take care of Davin. Then Tywin waved his hand, and the guards on both sides pushed the grey-faced Stafford down and sent him to the gallows, leaving a complete body. All the many westerly nobles and knights on both sides of Tywin were silent, and the atmosphere was extremely depressing. This tragic defeat greatly hit the confidence of the westerly army to resist Targaryen. And a young Lannister with golden hair and brown eyes had red eyes. He was Davin Lannister, the son of Stafford Lannister, but he could only watch his father being pushed to the gallows, and could do nothing. The news of a Baron's victory in burning the westerly army in the Battle of the Red Lake soon reached King's Landing. This was an epic battle destined to go down in history. A Baron led his army to defeat the Lannister army in 2 days. King's Landing received the news and celebrated the victory of the Targaryen army. After all, most of the people in King's Landing hated the Golden Lion family. Tyrion had mixed feelings when he heard the news, and for Cersei, it was like a thunderbolt, and her last support collapsed. But Viserys had no time to care about these things at the moment, even if it was the good news, because time passed quickly, and after 10 months of pregnancy, his queen, Princess Irian from Dorne, was about to give birth. Chapter 499 Diana Targaryen. The queen's upcoming birth is definitely the most important event in the Red Castle. Viserys has been in King's Landing for several months. During this time, the soldiers have been resting and recuperating. Endless wars will destroy the economy and livelihood of Westeros, as well as the fighting spirit of the soldiers. The Royal Council also drafted the bills to be promulgated by the new dynasty at Viserys' instruction. Of course, all these things have to be postponed for the queen's birth. Even Viserys has put aside the things at hand. He originally decided to fly to the outside of the wall if there was nothing to do in the near future. First, he wanted to ask the three-eyed raven what he wanted to see him, and by the way, he would see what the north, which is still shrouded in the power of the god of cold, is like. When Viserys' moon nature, that is, his mental power, reached 30, he was able to glimpse some vague and invisible areas. When Melisandre sacrificed herself in the tent, Viserys felt the power of the Lord of Light through the flames and the combination with the Red Witch. He saw the areas that only the gods could see. Now, these two intertwined powers are still entangled, and the power of the god of cold is still hovering over the north, and has not left. Melisandre therefore predicted that the White Walkers had not been completely repelled, and might come back again in 5 years. None of the important ministers in the royal meeting believed what she said, and they doubted the mysterious Red Witch, but Viserys believed what she said, because he did not see it through Melisandre's prophecy, but saw it all with his own eyes, and was also placed at a different height. Viserys was originally prepared to wait for the public trial of Robert and others' crimes, before launching the Second Conquest War, attacking from all sides, and completely unifying the entire Westeros. However, the queen's early delivery completely disrupted all his plans. The silver-haired young man now pushed away everything, and was waiting anxiously outside the delivery room. For women of this era, giving birth is a very dangerous thing. Viserys' mother died in bed when she gave birth to Daenerys. The treatment of the queen may be slightly different. The king's continuous offspring is perhaps the most important thing for the royal family, so there are naturally special midwives in the Red Castle. They help the queen to give birth to children smoothly, which may be safer than the poor people, but in the final analysis, it is still the woman who has to go through the gates of hell herself. The nobles and ministers of the royal council and the court all want to wait here, looking forward to the birth of the little prince or princess, but they are all rejected by Viserys. Giving birth is not a political show. Irian is his wife. He only hopes that his wife can give birth safely and then have a good rest without being disturbed by these idle people. Now Viserys only has a small number of relatives and friends waiting outside the door. Rhaenys is Irian's cousin, and the Sand Snake sisters are Irian's best friends, and her younger brother is Prince Quentyn Martell of Dorne. Robb Stark and Sansa Stark are also here. Robb was given to Viserys as a servant by Lady Catelyn as he wished. Sansa was also taken in as a maid by Queen Irian. Although the little girl was a little clumsy, the nobles took in servants for mutual exchange of feelings. At this moment, the reddish-brown-haired boy held the wine jug in one hand and stood behind Viserys with a nervous expression. Robb Stark suddenly changed from the lofty heir of Winterfell to a homeless orphan. He followed his mother on the road every day and finally came to King's Landing. However, when he arrived here, Robb found that his status was not as important as he imagined. Especially after the complete fall of the North, people looked at him as if they were looking at a clown, full of pity. Although Robb was very young, he still felt angry. Even if the North fell, he was still the heir of Winterfell. The Stark people with the blood of the running wolf were not something that these bastards who couldn't even find their surnames could despise. During the time Robb lived in King's Landing, he vowed to work hard and take back his parents as soon as possible. However, he studied hard and practiced swordsmanship every day, but he didn't expect that one day his mother would send him to the king as a servant. The ambitious young man was forced to put down his sword and pick up a wine pot instead, so he has not adapted to it yet. His sister Sansa adapted faster than him. Compared with Robb, who wanted to return to Winterfell, Sansa actually yearned for the prosperous King's Landing more. She would rather stay in the palace than the snowy Winterfell. At this time, the loud cry of a baby suddenly came from the delivery room, and everyone waiting outside the delivery room was shocked. Then the door of the delivery room was pushed open, and a midwife came out with a happy face. "Congratulations, Your Majesty, it's a little princess." Queen Irian successfully gave birth to a princess for Viserys. Although it was a pity that it was not a prince, it still spread quickly, causing cheers and celebrations throughout the city. Even the news that the king had a child overwhelmed Oberyn's victory at the Red Lake, and it caused a lot of discussion for a while. His Majesty is in good health, and he can successfully make the queen pregnant and give birth to a child. This is the best news for the stability of the country. At the same time, this is also a guarantee for many soldiers who follow Viserys. After all, they are on the same front. For ordinary people, the major events that the upper class cares about often become the topic of their conversation after dinner. Merchants, peddlers, hired knights, etc. who travel to and from King's Landing. Even though it has been a few days since the queen gave birth to a little princess, the discussion has not stopped. And the most discussed issue is, what name will this newly born princess be called? Some people suggested that the princess be called Helena Targaryen, because the story is always deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. This kind queen has left a deep impression on people in the story, and she is deeply loved by the people of King's Landing. Others suggested Daenerys Targaryen, which is also a nice name, but this famous queen in history did not end up with a good ending. However, Viserys and Irian finally discussed and decided to name their eldest daughter Diana, a name similar to a legendary moon god, but with a slightly different pronunciation. Then the news came from the Red Keep that a grand tournament would be held in King's Landing on Princess Diana Targaryen's first name day a year later. The champion would be rewarded with 10,000 gold dragons, and civilians without knight titles could also participate. Chapter 500, heading to the frontier. And in the Red Keep, Diana, my daughter. A few days had passed since Irian gave birth to Diana. Viserys had finally become a father after coming to this world for so many years, leaving his own bloodline, so naturally he could not hide his joy. He stretched out his hand to scratch his daughter's little nose, and then joked, "In order to welcome your arrival, your uncle set a fire in the west that could be seen by the entire Westerlands." Because of Irian's delivery, Viserys became the last person to see this intelligence. He just knew that Oberyn had made such a big fuss. Oberyn's fire killed tens of thousands of people, and the Lannister army was completely wiped out. Diana was born a few days after her uncle set the fire. Oberyn really gave Diana a special gift, and this little guy has made such a big fuss just after he was born. Wouldn't he be able to stir up more storms in the future? If she was more beautiful, she might even be called a beauty. But Viserys just thought about it in his mind, then laughed dumbly, and pinched the little guy's nose. Beauty is a disaster, and it is not a compliment. How could he expect his daughter to become such a person in the future? Queen Irian on the bed had been recuperating for a few days, and her face was still a little pale, but she couldn't help but smile when she saw her daughter sleeping quietly, especially Diana's soft silver hair. Babies actually have hair when they are born, but it is not very long, and a pair of clear and bright purple eyes. She looked at the world curiously, but it was still a little blurry because of the limitations of her vision. But as a biological instinct, she could understand that the two people in front of her were her father and mother, and they would never hurt her. "Diana looks like you, Viserys." Looking at her daughter and studying her face, Irian couldn't help but speak with a little sourness in her tone. Diana is Irian's daughter, but she doesn't have too many characteristics of her mother. Perhaps it is because the blood power of Viserys is too strong, which makes the species more tenacious. Diana's facial lines look a bit like her mother's, and her face is more like the exotic face of the Dornish, with deep eye sockets and big eyes. Her hair, eye color and other obvious features are all taken from her father. She has absorbed more from me than what you see. Viserys looked at his daughter, who didn't cry or make a fuss, lying obediently on the bed, then gently pinched her cheeks that seemed to be as tender as water and spoke calmly. Viserys' lavender eyes flickered slightly. He saw the seeds of the black mist in Diana's body, and it seemed that she took it away from her body. However, Viserys was hesitant about whether to take a seed from his daughter's body. The benefits of the black mist are very obvious, but the disadvantages are not very clear at present. Sorry, my love. I didn't give you a son. Seeing Viserys lost in thought, Irian couldn't help but feel uneasy, and then spoke softly. She really wanted to give birth to a little prince for Viserys. Although both the princess and the prince had the right of inheritance in Dorne, as the eldest daughter of Prince Doran, Irian knew that even in a place like Dorne, that was known for its fair inheritance rights, it was difficult for a girl to inherit her father's family business. She knew very well that her father preferred her younger brother Quentyn Martell. If Irian had been like her in the past, she would have to compete with Quentyn. But now she no longer looked down on Dorne. She wanted to give birth to a son for Viserys, and then let her son sit on the Iron Throne in the future, and become the king who ruled the Seven Kingdoms. No, it's not your fault, Irian. Viserys heard his wife's words, and raised his head slightly to look at her, then stretched out his hand through her hair, and held her in his arms. Compared to those annoying boys, I actually prefer girls. Because I'm a boy myself, I know how annoying a naughty boy is when he is young, and he often gets into trouble that people can't expect. Viserys' comforting words made Irian laugh, and she couldn't help laughing out loud. She was actually really worried that Viserys would dislike her because of this. After all, it was very important for the king to have a son. But, as far as I know, you were not a naughty boy when you were young. I knew I had an engagement with you when I was very young, and my family often told me about your recent situation. Everyone said that you are a rare genius. Irian started to talk about the past, but Viserys just smiled and shook his head without explaining the matter in detail, and then spoke sincerely. I also want to thank you for giving me a little princess. After Viserys' voice fell, the room suddenly fell silent. Irian's eyes were slightly red, and then the silver-haired young man hugged his wife's arms and tightened them slightly. When Diana grows up, give her a dragon. Vaga, Merixes, or Syrinx, but I guess Diana will choose the little lady. Irian gave birth to a princess, and Viserys no longer had the last worry of staying in King's Landing. He decided to solve the problem of the three-eyed raven before launching the Second War of Conquest. He was relieved that Rhaenys and Rhaegal stayed in King's Landing. His Kingsguard admirer accompanied the queen and the little princess, eating and sleeping together to prevent any mishaps. A few days later, Viserys took Balerion and flew north. He passed through the Riverlands, the Neck, and flew over the Bay of Kaelin. Today, after several months of recuperation, the Riverlands have regained their greenness. The people in the villages and towns live and work in peace and have resumed their production and life. There is no trace of war. Viserys had to sigh that the human recovery ability is really tenacious. As a restricted area with few people, the people of the marshland who lived in the marshland had all died in the war of the invasion of the White Walkers and were almost extinct. For some reason, the marshland leader Howland Reed did not escape during the war, but chose to hang himself in the castle of Greywater Watch, and his two children disappeared without a trace. Then came the Bay of Kaelin. Because there were no traces of humans, the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms south of the marsh soon fell into civil war. After winning the war against the White Walkers, everyone was fighting and no one thought about repairing this ancient causeway so that humans could once again cross the marshland from land. So now it is still deserted after the explosion. How the huge figure of the black dragon passed through the clouds. The wind whistled in Viserys' ears, and snowflakes began to float around. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.